The car keys left Ethan Brooks's hand at 11:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would split his life into before and after. He'd just given a complete stranger, a young woman with hollow eyes and worn shoes, permission to drive away in his only vehicle. No collateral, no ID, no last name. Every instinct he'd honed through a brutal divorce and 3 years of single fatherhood screamed that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. But as her fingers closed around the metal, something shifted in his chest. Maybe trust wasn't about certainty. Maybe it was about the courage to be wrong. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The accident happened at 6:23 a.m. Ethan Brooks first noticed the brake lights half a mile ahead. A sudden constellation of red stars appearing on the Kennedy Expressway like a warning he couldn't decode. He was driving his silver Honda Accord, the reliable 8-year-old sedan that had survived his divorce, 2 job changes, and countless trips ferrying his daughter Maya to soccer practice. The morning was crystalline and cold, the kind of Chicago autumn day where everything felt sharp-edged and possible. His phone was mounted on the dashboard, displaying his itinerary with the ruthless precision he'd come to depend on. Flight UA 2847 to San Francisco, departure 8:45 a.m., gate C17. Below that, a series of calendar blocks in different colors. Red for critical, yellow for important, blue for flexible. This trip was red, crimson actually. The most important pitch of his career, 3 years in the making, the kind of opportunity that could transform his small consulting firm from a one-man operation into something that mattered. Ethan had been awake since 4:30 a.m. He'd showered, dressed in his charcoal suit, the one his ex-wife Rebecca had always said made him look like he belonged in boardrooms, and carefully packed his carry-on with the precision of a man who'd learned that control was the only reliable currency in an unreliable world. His presentation was loaded on his laptop, backed up on a thumb drive, and backed up again in the cloud. He'd kissed Maya goodbye while she was still sleeping, her 11-year-old face peaceful against the pillow, blonde hair spilling across the fabric like sunlight. The traffic slowed to 40 miles per hour, then 30, then 20. Ethan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, leather creaking under his grip. He glanced at the clock, 6:24, still fine. The airport was only 12 miles away. Even with traffic, he'd budgeted 90 minutes for a 35-minute drive. That was the Ethan Brooks method. Anticipate every variable, build in redundancy, never leave anything to chance. The cars ahead of him stopped completely. "Come on," Ethan muttered, leaning forward as if he could will the traffic to move through sheer force of concentration. "Come on, come on, come on." Nothing moved. In the lane beside him, a woman in a Lexus was applying mascara using her rearview mirror, completely unbothered by the standstill. 2 lanes over, a truck driver had his elbow out the window, smoking a cigarette with the patience of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. Ethan pulled up the traffic app on his phone. The map bloomed with red and black lines, red for heavy traffic, black for complete stoppage. And there, about a quarter mile ahead, was the icon he'd been dreading. A small symbol indicating an accident, a serious one, judging by the way the traffic stretched back like a blood clot in an artery. 6:28 a.m. He called the airline. An automated voice informed him that his flight was on time, boarding would begin at 8:15, and please have his boarding pass ready for scanning. He ended the call and immediately opened his email, scrolling to the message from David Chen, the CEO of Meridian Technologies, the company he'd been courting for 3 years. "Ethan, looking forward to the presentation. The board is very excited. This could be the beginning of something significant. See you at 2 p.m. sharp. David." Something significant. Ethan had read that email 17 times since it arrived 3 days ago, each time feeling the weight of those words settle more heavily on his shoulders. Meridian was the kind of client that could change everything. Annual contract worth $800,000, potential for expansion, the credibility to attract other major accounts. It was the opportunity he'd been working towards since Rebecca had left. Since the divorce had stripped away half his savings and most of his confidence. Since he'd found himself alone in a 2-bedroom apartment trying to figure out how to be both mother and father to a daughter who asked questions he didn't know how to answer. 6:35 a.m. The traffic hadn't moved an inch. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up through his sunroof, an absurd gesture, but he needed to see. Ahead of him, the expressway stretched like a parking lot. Hundreds of cars, thousands of people, all trapped in the same chrome and steel cage. In the distance, he could see flashing lights, red, blue, white. The emergency response creating a light show against the morning sky. A man in the car ahead of him also stood through his sunroof. They made eye contact. "Looks bad," the man called out. "How bad?" Ethan shouted back. The man shrugged. "Saw an ambulance go by on the shoulder about 10 minutes ago. Probably going to be a while." Ethan dropped back into his seat. His chest felt tight, that familiar pressure building behind his sternum. The same feeling he'd had when Rebecca's lawyer had handed him the divorce papers, when the doctor had told him his father had 6 months to live, when Maya had asked him why Mommy didn't want to live with them anymore. He checked his phone again, 6:41. He did the math. If the accident cleared in the next 15 minutes, if traffic started moving at a reasonable pace, if he could average 45 miles per hour the rest of the way, he could still make it, barely. But that required everything going right, and Ethan's life had taught him a fundamental truth. Things didn't go right. Things went wrong in small, incremental ways until you looked up and realized you'd lost everything you thought was permanent. At 7:03 a.m., the traffic started moving, not flowing, crawling. 5 miles per hour, maybe less. Ethan's Honda inched forward like a glacier, and with every minute that passed, he felt his future slipping further out of reach. He called the airline again. This time, he waded through the automated menu and reached a human being, a woman with a flat Midwestern accent who sounded like she'd had this conversation 10,000 times before. "I'm stuck in traffic," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice level. "Major accident on the expressway. Is there any way to hold the flight? I'm sorry, sir, but we can't delay departures for individual passengers. However, if you miss your flight, we can rebook you on the next available. When is the next available flight to San Francisco?" A pause. Keyboard clicks. "We have a 2:15 p.m. departure with 1 seat remaining in economy. I can place you on standby for the 11:30, but that's currently oversold." 2:15 p.m. His meeting was at 2 p.m. Pacific time, which was 4 p.m. Chicago time. Even with the time difference, even if the flight left exactly on schedule and he sprinted through SFO like an Olympic athlete, he'd be walking into Meridian's office at 5:30 p.m. local time, 3.5 hours late. "Sir," the woman said, "would you like me to rebook you?" Ethan's mind raced through scenarios. He could call David, explain the situation, ask to reschedule. But David had specifically mentioned the board would be there, busy people who'd carved time out of their schedules for this presentation. Rescheduling wasn't just inconvenient, it suggested unreliability, lack of commitment, the kind of weakness that made executives choose someone else. "Sir?" the woman repeated. "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "Put me on the 2:15. "Confirmed. Boarding pass will be sent to your email. Will there be anything else?" Ethan wanted to say yes. He wanted to ask her if she knew what it felt like to watch your entire professional life depend on a single moment. If she understood that this wasn't just about money or success, but about proving to himself that he was capable, that the divorce hadn't broken him, that he could still build something meaningful from the wreckage of his old life. Instead, he said, "No, thank you." He ended the call and immediately dialed David Chen's office. The receptionist answered, professional, efficient, gatekeeping. "This is Ethan Brooks. I need to speak with Mr. Chen urgently." "Mr. Chen is in a meeting until 9:30. Can I take a message?" "I'm supposed to present to the board this afternoon, but I'm stuck in traffic. There's been an accident. I'm going to miss my flight." "Oh." A pause that contained worlds of judgment. "Let me see if I can interrupt him." Ethan waited, watching the traffic creep forward at a pace that would have been pathetic for a walking speed. His heart hammered against his ribs. Through the phone, he could hear muffled voices, footsteps, a door opening. "Ethan?" David Chen's voice came through, clipped and distracted. "What's happening?" "David, I'm so sorry. There's been a major accident on the expressway. I'm going to miss my 8:45 flight. The next one doesn't land until after our meeting time." Silence. In the background, Ethan could hear other voices, the board members probably, already gathering in some glass-walled conference room overlooking the bay, coffee in hand, expecting a presentation that would justify the faith David had placed in an unknown consultant from Chicago. "How late are we talking?" David asked. "I'd arrive around 5:30 your time at the earliest." Another pause, longer this time. Ethan could hear the calculation happening in David's mind. The inconvenience, the logistics, the question of whether Ethan Brooks was worth the hassle. "The board is only available today," David said finally. "We have people flying in from New York, Seattle, London. I've been talking you up for weeks, Ethan. I went out on a limb recommending you over established firms." I know, and Can you present remotely, video conference?" Ethan's stomach sank. A video call wasn't the same. He'd planned for in-person presentation, eye contact, body language, the ability to read the room and adjust on the fly. Remote meant technical glitches, connection delays, the loss of all the subtle tools he'd relied on to make this pitch work. "I can," he said, "if that's what works best. Let me talk to the board. I'll call you back in 20 minutes. The line went dead. Ethan sat in his car, surrounded by thousands of other trapped commuters, and felt the familiar weight of helplessness settle over him like a burial shroud. This was the thing he hated most, the loss of control, the way the universe could simply decide to upend your carefully constructed plans without warning or mercy. He'd built his entire life around avoiding this feeling. After Rebecca left, he'd created systems, routines, backup plans for his backup plans. He'd transformed himself from someone who'd once been spontaneous and trusting into someone who measured every risk, calculated every probability, protected himself from the chaos that had once destroyed him. And here he was anyway, trapped on a highway, watching his most important opportunity dissolve like sugar in rain. At 7:51 a.m., the traffic finally started moving at a normal speed. The accident scene appeared on his left. 2 semis and a minivan, the vehicles twisted into shapes that defied their original engineering, glass scattered across the asphalt like diamonds, emergency workers still directing traffic around the wreckage. Ethan caught a glimpse of a stretcher being loaded into an ambulance and felt a sharp stab of guilt for resenting the delay. Someone's morning had gone infinitely worse than his. He reached the airport at 8:52 a.m., 7 minutes after his flight had departed. Through the terminal windows, he could see his plane pulling away from the gate, the massive United aircraft moving with the slow inevitability of an iceberg. Ethan stood there with his carry-on bag, his carefully pressed suit, his color-coded itinerary, and watched it disappear toward the runway. His phone rang. David Chen. "Ethan, I've got good news and bad news. The board is willing to do a video presentation, but it has to be at 4 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. your time. That's the only window where everyone can make it work. Can you do that?" 6 p.m. Maya's soccer game started at 6:30. He'd promised he'd be there, had specifically scheduled this trip to be back in time because he'd already missed her last 2 games due to work. She'd been understanding, the way she always was, but he'd seen the disappointment in her eyes, the slow acceptance that Dad's promises were negotiable. "I can do that," Ethan heard himself say. "Great. I'll send you the video link, and Ethan, this better be spectacular. I'm using up a lot of political capital here." "It will be. Thank you, David." Ethan ended the call and stood in the terminal, surrounded by travelers who knew where they were going, what flight they were catching, what their next 6 hours looked like. He had nowhere to be for the next 5 hours. His carefully orchestrated day had collapsed into empty time. He found a seat near gate B12 and pulled out his laptop, intending to review his presentation one more time. But his mind wouldn't focus. The slides he'd crafted so carefully, market analysis, competitive positioning, ROI projections, suddenly seemed hollow, like he was trying to impress people who didn't care whether he lived or died, whose approval he was chasing for reasons he could no longer quite articulate. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Good luck today, Dad. You're going to kill it." Ethan stared at the message, at the heart emoji his daughter had added, and felt something crack inside his chest. She didn't know he'd already failed, that he was sitting in an airport instead of flying toward his future. That he was about to miss another one of her games because he'd chosen work over presents yet again. He typed back, "Thanks, sweetheart. Love you." The words felt inadequate, a placeholder for all the things he couldn't say, didn't know how to say. That he was sorry, that he was trying, that some part of him had been broken 3 years ago and he still hadn't figured out how to repair it. Ethan closed his laptop and leaned back in the uncomfortable airport chair. Around him, the terminal hummed with movement, announcements echoing from unseen speakers, rolling luggage creating a constant percussion, children crying, couples arguing, business travelers typing urgently on phones. Everyone in motion, everyone with purpose. He stood up, needing to move, and began walking aimlessly through the concourse. Past a bookstore selling bestsellers he'd never read, past a bar where people were drinking beer at 9 a.m., past gate after gate of aircraft preparing to carry people toward their destinations. That's when he saw her. She was sitting on the floor near the exit that led to the parking garage, a spot most travelers rushed past without noticing, a transitional space between the terminal and the outside world. Young, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans that had seen too many washings, a gray sweatshirt with a faded university logo, and canvas sneakers with holes worn through the fabric near the toes. What struck Ethan wasn't her appearance, though. It was her stillness. Everyone else in the airport was in motion, even when sitting, checking phones, eating food, talking, reading, doing something. This young woman simply sat with her back against the wall, hands folded in her lap, eyes open but distant, like she was looking at something very far away. A small backpack sat beside her, military green and worn, the kind of pack that had traveled many miles. Ethan walked past her, then stopped, turned back. She wasn't begging, wasn't holding a sign, wasn't asking for anything. She was just there, existing in a space where people like her weren't supposed to exist. The airport was for travelers, for people with destinations and credit cards and places to sleep tonight. It wasn't for people who sat on the floor with everything they owned in a backpack. Their eyes met for a brief second. Hers were brown, he noticed. Clear and intelligent, with none of the glazed confusion he'd expected. She looked at him with the wary assessment of someone who'd learned that eye contact with strangers rarely led anywhere good, then looked away. Ethan should have kept walking. He had 5 hours to kill, a presentation to prepare, a daughter to text back with better words than the ones he'd managed. This young woman was none of his business, none of his concern, just another invisible person in a city full of invisible people. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the morning he'd had, the accident, the missed flight, the slow dissolution of his carefully controlled plans. Maybe it was the memory of Maya's text message, the heart emoji that reminded him that someone still believed he was capable of goodness. Maybe it was simply that for the first time in years, he had nowhere he had to be, and that strange freedom made him capable of seeing someone he would normally have walked past without a second glance. Ethan approached her slowly, the way you might approach a wounded animal. "Excuse me," he said softly. She looked up at him, and this time her eyes held a flash of something, resignation maybe, or the tired acceptance of someone who'd had this conversation many times before and knew how it would end. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm, with an accent he couldn't quite place. Somewhere Midwestern, he thought. Iowa, maybe. Or Nebraska. "I know," Ethan said. He reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 $20 bills. "I just thought—" "I don't need money," she interrupted. Ethan paused, the bills still extended toward her. "Everyone needs money. I need other things more." It was such an unexpected response that Ethan found himself actually looking at her, not as a problem to be solved with $40, but as a person who just said something that didn't fit the script he'd been following. "What do you need?" he asked. She studied him for a long moment, and Ethan had the uncomfortable sensation of being evaluated, measured against some standard he didn't understand. Finally, she said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you have a car parked here?" The question was so strange, so unrelated to anything he'd expected, that Ethan just blinked. "Yes, in the long-term lot. Why?" "I need to borrow it." Ethan actually laughed, a short, startled bark of sound. "You need to borrow my car." "Yes." "You want me to just Give you my car keys so you can drive away in my vehicle. Just for a few hours, I need to go home. Get something I left behind. Then I'll bring it back before your flight leaves. She said it so matter-of-factly, like she was asking to borrow a phone charger or directions to the bathroom, that for a moment Ethan couldn't process the absurdity of the request. This stranger, this young woman he'd never met, whose name he didn't know, who was sitting on an airport floor with a worn backpack, wanted him to hand over his car. That's... Ethan started, then stopped. That's insane, he'd been about to say. That's the most ridiculous thing anyone has ever asked me. That's a transparent scam that I'd have to be monumentally stupid to fall for. I know how it sounds, she said quietly. I know you don't know me. I know you have no reason to trust me. Then why are you asking? She was quiet for a moment, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft he had to lean in to hear it. Because I'm desperate. And because you're the first person who's looked at me like I'm a person in 3 days. And because sometimes you have to ask for impossible things. Because the possible things stopped working a long time ago. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, that same crack he'd felt reading Maya's text message, a fissure in the armor he'd built so carefully around his heart. What's your name? He asked. Does it matter? Yes. She studied his face again with those clear brown eyes. Emma, she said finally. Emma Carver. I'm Ethan Brooks. He held out his hand formally, absurdly, like they were at a networking event instead of having a conversation about Grand Theft Auto on an airport floor. Emma looked at his hand, then took it. Her grip was firm, her palm rough with calluses. Not the soft hand of someone who worked in an office. Someone who'd worked with their hands, physical labor, real work. Where do you need to go, Emma? Home. Well, my old home, about 40 minutes from here, Naperville. Ethan knew Naperville, a quiet suburb, tree-lined streets, good schools, the kind of place where families settled down to raise children and build normal lives. What had brought Emma Carver from there to an airport floor? What did you leave behind? He asked. She hesitated, and for the first time he saw something vulnerable in her expression. A box. Just a small box. It has things that belong to my mom. Photos, letters, her wedding ring. My landlord locked me out 2 weeks ago when I couldn't make rent. He said he'd keep my stuff in the garage for 30 days, but I just found out he's planning to throw it all out tomorrow. That box is the only thing I care about. Everything else he can have. Ethan's mind was racing through calculations, probabilities, risk assessments. This was obviously a scam. Had to be. No rational person would hand their car keys to a stranger based on a sad story about a dead mother and an eviction. This was how people got their vehicles stolen, their identities compromised, their trust exploited. But as he looked at Emma Carver, at the way she held herself with a strange dignity despite sitting on a floor in clothes that had seen too many wearings, he found himself believing her. Or maybe not believing, maybe just wanting to believe, which was somehow different, somehow more dangerous. I don't have a car, Emma continued, her voice taking on a rushed quality, like she needed to get all the words out before he walked away. I can't afford an Uber for an 80-minute round trip. I've been trying to figure out how to get there for 2 days. I walked to the airport because I thought maybe I could clean bathrooms or something, make enough money, but they said they weren't hiring, and then you stopped. And I thought maybe... She stopped, shaking her head. Never mind. This was stupid. I'm sorry I asked. She started to stand up, gathering her backpack, preparing to disappear back into whatever invisible existence she'd been inhabiting before Ethan had noticed her. Wait, Ethan said. Emma paused, still crouched, her hand on the backpack strap. Every reasonable impulse in Ethan's brain was screaming at him to walk away. He thought about the divorce, about how Rebecca had systematically taken advantage of his trust, how he'd learned, slowly, painfully, that kindness was often just another word for weakness, that people used your compassion as a weapon to hurt you. He thought about Maya, about how he'd promised to be home for her game, how lending his car to a stranger could go catastrophically wrong and leave him stranded, unable to keep yet another promise to his daughter. He thought about the presentation at 6 p.m., about David Chen and the board members, and the opportunity he couldn't afford to lose, about how a missing car would make that impossible. He thought about every rational reason to say no, and then he took his car keys out of his pocket. "Section D, Level 3, he said, his voice not quite steady. "Silver Honda Accord. License plate JKH 2847. The GPS is acting up, so you'll need to use your phone for directions." Emma stared at him like he'd just spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "My flight doesn't leave until 2:15. It's 9:30 now. That gives you almost 5 hours. I need the car back by 1:45 at the absolute latest." He heard himself speaking, heard the words coming out of his mouth, and couldn't quite believe it was him saying them. "You're serious." "Apparently." He held out the keys, his hand trembling slightly. "Promise me you'll bring it back." Emma took the keys slowly, carefully, like they might bite her. "I promise. I swear to you I'll bring it back." "I'm trusting you," Ethan said, and the words felt huge, impossible, terrifying. "I know." Emma's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." She stood up, slinging the backpack over her shoulder. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Two strangers who'd somehow stepped outside the normal rules of human interaction into something else entirely. "Why?" Emma asked softly. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan thought about that question, about all the answers he could give. "Because your story moved me. Because I wanted to do something good today. Because I'm tired of living in fear." But what came out was simpler, more honest. "I don't know." Emma nodded, like that made perfect sense. "I'll see you in a few hours, Ethan Brooks." And then she was walking away, moving through the terminal with his car keys in her hand, and Ethan was standing alone near the parking garage exit, watching a complete stranger leave with his only vehicle, his means of getting home, his ability to control what happened next. His phone buzzed. A text from David. "Video link attached. See you at 6 p.m. sharp. Don't screw this up." Ethan looked at the message, then at the space where Emma had disappeared, then back at his phone. "Too late," he murmured to himself. "I think I already did." But as he walked back toward his gate, as he sat down and opened his laptop and tried to focus on his presentation, Ethan realized something strange. The tightness in his chest was gone. That crushing pressure that had been building since 6:23 a.m. when the traffic stopped, since the divorce, since he'd reorganized his entire life around protection and control, it had lifted. He'd just done possibly the stupidest thing he'd ever done, and somehow, impossibly, he felt lighter. Outside the terminal windows, aircraft continued their endless ballet of arrivals and departures. Somewhere in the city, Emma Carver was driving his Honda Accord toward Naperville, toward a box of memories that might or might not exist. In 5 hours, Ethan would either have his car back, or he'd have learned an expensive lesson about the cost of misplaced trust. But for now, in this moment, he'd chosen to believe in someone. And that choice, reckless, illogical, utterly unlike him, felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Ethan sat at gate B12 for exactly 11 minutes before the doubt started creeping in. It began as a whisper in the back of his mind, a small voice that sounded suspiciously like Rebecca during their worst arguments. "You're such an easy mark, Ethan. You believe everyone. You trust too easily. That's why people take advantage of you." He pulled out his phone and opened the Find My app, then remembered with a sinking feeling that it only tracked Apple devices. His car wasn't equipped with any tracking system. He'd thought about adding one after the divorce, when he'd been going through his phase of trying to control every possible variable, but had decided it was paranoid and unnecessary. Now it seemed less paranoid and more like basic common sense. Ethan did the math. Emma had left at 9:34 a.m. If she drove straight to Naperville, which was optimistic, she'd arrive around 10:15. Add 20 minutes to retrieve the box, another 45 minutes back, and she should return by 11:20. That would give him plenty of buffer time before his 2:15 flight, but that assumed everything went according to plan. That assumed Emma was telling the truth. That assumed she wasn't, at this very moment, driving his Honda toward a chop shop in Gary, Indiana, where it would be stripped for parts before lunch. He opened his laptop and tried to focus on his presentation. Slide 1. Market analysis showing a 34% growth in enterprise cloud solutions over the past 18 months. Slide 2, competitive positioning matrix. Slide 3, the numbers blurred in front of his eyes. All he could see was Emma's face, the way her hands had trembled slightly when she'd taken the keys, the roughness of her palm when they'd shaken hands. Those weren't the hands of a con artist. Or were they? What did a con artist's hands feel like? How would he even know? Ethan closed the laptop and stood up. He needed to move, to walk, to do something other than sit and spiral into anxiety. He found himself heading toward the parking garage exit, the same spot where he'd encountered Emma less than 20 minutes ago. The floor was empty now. No trace that she'd ever been there except a slight smudge mark on the wall where her back had rested. Ethan crouched down, touching the spot with his fingers, feeling ridiculous and desperate and completely out of his depth. "You okay, buddy?" Ethan looked up to find an airport security guard standing over him, a stocky man in his 50s with a kind face and weary eyes. "Yeah," Ethan said, standing quickly. "I'm fine. Just dropped something." The guard nodded, unconvinced. "You're the guy who was talking to the girl, right? The one who's been camping out here." "She wasn't camping. She was just sitting." "For 3 days," the guard said. "I noticed her Tuesday morning. Been keeping an eye on her, making sure she wasn't bothering people. She wasn't, though. Quietest homeless person I've ever seen. Didn't beg, didn't ask for handouts, just sat there like she was waiting for something that wasn't coming." 3 days. Emma had been sitting on this floor for 3 days. The information hit Ethan like a physical blow. Where had she slept? What had she eaten? The airport had bathrooms, at least, but 3 days of existing in this liminal space between destinations. "Did she ever cause any trouble?" Ethan asked. "Nah. Like I said, quietest person you'd ever meet. I brought her a sandwich yesterday from the food court. She thanked me, ate half, saved the other half for later. That's when I knew she was really struggling. People who aren't truly hungry don't save food like that." The guard studied Ethan's face. "You give her money?" Ethan hesitated. "Something like that." "Good. She needed it. This ain't no place for a kid to be living." The guard shook his head and continued his rounds, leaving Ethan alone with the weight of new information. 3 days. The box she'd mentioned, her mother's things, the eviction, it was all real. Had to be. Nobody sat on an airport floor for 3 days as part of an elaborate car theft scheme. The thought should have made him feel better, should have eased the anxiety gnawing at his stomach. Instead, it made everything worse. Because if Emma's story was true, then what he'd done wasn't reckless. It was the bare minimum of human decency. And if she didn't bring the car back, it wouldn't be because she was a criminal. It would be because she was desperate enough that even her promise to a stranger couldn't outweigh her need to survive. Ethan walked back to his gate and forced himself to work. He reviewed every slide, rehearsed his talking points, practiced the answers to questions he anticipated the board might ask. But every few minutes, his eyes would drift to the clock on his laptop. 10:47 a.m. Emma should be in Naperville by now, maybe already retrieving the box. 11:23 a.m. She should be heading back, unless she'd hit traffic, unless something had gone wrong. 11:58 a.m. His phone buzzed and his heart leaped, but it was just a promotional email from his credit card company. At 12:15 p.m., Ethan called his own phone. He'd left it in the car's cup holder like always, and maybe Emma would answer. Maybe he'd hear her voice and know everything was okay. The call went straight to voicemail. His own recorded voice greeted him. "You've reached Ethan Brooks. Leave a message." He hung up without speaking and tried to calculate the scenarios. Dead battery. She'd turned it off. She'd thrown it out the window while speeding toward Mexico. His hands were shaking. At 12:47 p.m., Ethan accepted that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Emma wasn't coming back. His car was gone. His ability to get home was gone. And he'd have to call Maya and tell her he'd missed another soccer game because he'd given his vehicle to a stranger based on nothing but a sad story and his own idiotic need to believe in something. He pulled up the number for Chicago Police non-emergency line. His thumb hovered over the call button. And then his phone rang. Unknown number. Ethan's heart hammered as he answered. "Hello? Mr. Brooks?" A woman's voice, not Emma's. older, with a smoker's rasp. Yes? This is Linda Kowalski. I'm a landlord in Naperville. I've got a young lady here named Emma who says you lent her your car. Ethan's mouth went dry. Is she okay? She's fine, more than fine. But she wanted me to call you, let you know she's on her way back, should be there by 1:30. A pause. She also wanted me to tell you that she kept her promise. Can I talk to her? Hang on. Muffled sounds, voices in the background. Then Emma came on the line. Ethan? The relief that washed over him was so intense he had to sit down. You called. I said I'd bring the car back. I keep my promises. Her voice sounded different, lighter, almost happy. I got the box. Linda let me into the garage. Everything was right where I left it. I'm glad. Ethan's voice came out rough. I was starting to worry. I know, I should have called earlier, but my phone died and I didn't have your number memorized, and she stopped. I'm sorry for making you worry. I'll be there soon. I promise. Drive safe. I will. The line went dead. Ethan sat there holding his phone, feeling like he'd just survived something he hadn't known was life-threatening. Around him, travelers continued their eternal airport ballet, boarding, deplaning, rushing toward connections, saying goodbyes, celebrating arrivals. Normal people doing normal things while Ethan Brooks sat in gate B12, having an emotional breakdown over a car he'd voluntarily given to a stranger. His laptop chimed. An email from David Chen. Just confirming we're all set for 6 p.m. Board is looking forward to it. This is your shot. Make it count. Ethan stared at the words. Make it count. As if success was simply a matter of effort, of wanting something badly enough. As if the universe cared about his carefully constructed presentations and color-coded calendars, and desperate need to prove he was still capable of building something that mattered. At 1:33 p.m., Ethan received a text from an unknown number. Parking garage. Section D, Level 3. Keys under driver's side floor mat. Thank you for everything. E. He stood up so fast his laptop almost fell off his lap. Grabbed his carry-on, his briefcase, his jacket, and half-walked, half-ran toward the parking garage. His gate was in Terminal 1. The garage was a 5-minute walk, and every second felt like an hour. The elevator to Level 3 seemed to move in slow motion. When the doors finally opened, Ethan stepped out into the concrete cavern of parked vehicles, the air thick with exhaust and the echo of distant engines. Section D, Row 7. There. His silver Honda Accord sat exactly where he'd left it that morning, looking completely ordinary, completely unchanged, like the last 4 hours had been a fever dream. Ethan approached it slowly, almost afraid to touch it, afraid it might disappear if he got too close. The driver's side door was unlocked. He opened it and found the keys under the floor mat, exactly where Emma had said. Everything else looked normal, nothing missing, nothing disturbed. The car even smelled the same, that familiar mixture of coffee and the lavender air freshener Maya had insisted he buy. But on the passenger seat sat a piece of paper, torn from a spiral notebook, covered in careful handwriting. Ethan picked it up, his hands trembling. Dear Ethan, I don't know how to thank you for what you did today. Most people looked through me like I was invisible. You saw me as a person. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You gave me a chance to get back something I thought I'd lost forever. The box had my mother's wedding ring, her letters to my dad when he was deployed in Iraq, photos from my childhood, and a recipe book she started writing before she got sick. These things are worthless to anyone else, but they're everything to me. They're proof that I had a life before everything fell apart. Proof that I belonged somewhere once. I know you were scared I wouldn't bring the car back. I could see it in your eyes when you gave me the keys. But you did it anyway. That kind of courage, trusting someone despite your fear, that's real strength. That's the kind of person I want to be when I figure out how to put my life back together. I'm leaving Chicago tonight. I have a cousin in Portland who said I can stay with her while I get on my feet. I've been too proud to ask for help, but today you taught me that accepting kindness isn't weakness. It's just being human. I hope your presentation goes well. I hope you get everything you're working for, but more than that, I hope you remember that what you did today mattered. You changed my life. That's worth more than any business deal. Don't look for me. I'm not who I was when we met, and I need time to figure out who I'm going to be next. But I'll never forget Ethan Brooks, the man who handed a stranger his car keys and believed in promises. Thank you for seeing me. Emma. Ethan read the letter 3 times, standing in the parking garage with travelers walking past him, car engines starting and stopping, the whole machinery of the airport continuing around him while he stood frozen in place. She'd kept her promise. More than that, she'd returned the car with a full tank of gas. He could see the fuel gauge reading full, whereas it had been at a quarter tank when he'd left that morning. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Did you land yet? Break a leg on your presentation. Also, Dad, Coach said if you can't make the game, it's okay, but I really hope you can come. Love you. Ethan looked at the message, then at Emma's letter, then at the clock on his dashboard. 1:41 p.m. His flight boarded at 1:45. He needed to be at the gate right now if he had any hope of making it. But he didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called David Chen directly, bypassing the receptionist. Ethan, everything okay? David, I need to ask you something. Is there any flexibility on the timing tonight? A pause. Ethan could hear the tension crackling through the line. We pushed the board meeting back 3 hours to accommodate you. How much more flexibility do you need? What if we did tomorrow instead? Morning, your time. I could catch the red eye tonight, be fresh for a 9 a.m. presentation. Ethan, what the hell is going on? This morning you were desperate to make this work. Now you want to reschedule again? Ethan looked at Emma's letter, at her careful handwriting, at the words that had cracked something open inside him that he'd kept locked for 3 years. I have somewhere I need to be tonight, he said quietly. Something more important than the presentation. More important than an $800,000 contract. More important than the opportunity I stuck my neck out to give you. Yes. The word hung in the air between them. Ethan waited for David to explode, to tell him the deal was off, that he'd burned a bridge he couldn't afford to lose. Instead, David laughed, a short, surprise sound. You know what? Good for you. I've been working 100-hour weeks for 15 years, missed my daughter's graduation, my son's wedding, countless birthdays and anniversaries. My wife left me last year, said she was tired of being married to a ghost. His voice softened. What's so important, if you don't mind me asking? My daughter has a soccer game at 6:30. I promised I'd be there. Another pause, then. The board meets every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific. I can get you in front of them tomorrow if you can be here. But Ethan, this is your last chance. No more reschedules. I'll be there, Ethan said. Thank you, David. Don't thank me. Just show up. Ethan ended the call and sat in his car, Emma's letter still clutched in his hand. He had 8 hours until Maya's game. Plenty of time to get home, change clothes, be the father he'd promised to be when Rebecca left, and he'd sworn he'd never let Maya feel abandoned. He started the engine and began the drive home, but his mind kept circling back to Emma's words. You changed my life. Had he? Or had she changed his? This morning he'd been a man willing to sacrifice anything, his daughter's trust, his own integrity, his presence in the moments that actually mattered, for a business deal that would supposedly prove he was successful, whole, worthy. And then a stranger had asked him for an impossible favor, and he'd said yes. Not because it made sense, not because he'd calculated the risk and found it acceptable, but because for one moment he'd chosen to believe in something other than his own fear. The drive home took 45 minutes. Chicago sprawled around him, millions of people living their lives, facing their own impossible choices, trying to figure out how to be human in a world that didn't make it easy. Somewhere in this city, Emma Carver was preparing to leave for Portland, carrying a box of memories and a second chance she'd fought to reclaim. Ethan hoped she made it, hoped her cousin welcomed her, hoped she found whatever she was looking for. When he pulled into his apartment complex at 2:43 p.m., he sat in the car for a moment, looking at Emma's letter one more time. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his wallet, next to a photo of Maya, next to his emergency credit card, in the space where he kept the things he couldn't afford to lose. Inside the apartment, Ethan changed into jeans and a sweater, made himself a sandwich he was too anxious to eat, and tried to review his presentation one more time. But the slides felt hollow now, the carefully constructed arguments ringing false. He'd spent 3 years building his business as a fortress against failure, against vulnerability, against ever being hurt the way Rebecca had hurt him. And in the process, he'd forgotten how to be present, how to see people, how to trust that sometimes the most important thing you could do was show up. His phone rang at 4:17 p.m. Unknown number again. Ethan answered, half hoping it might be Emma, though he knew that was unlikely. "Is this Ethan Brooks?" A man's voice this time, officials sounding. "Yes? This is Officer Martinez with Chicago PD. We have a report of a stolen vehicle registered to your name, a silver 2016 Honda Accord." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What? No, my car's not stolen. It's right here. Sir, we received a call about 3 hours ago from someone reporting suspicious activity involving your vehicle in Naperville. Are you saying the car is in your possession?" "Yes, I'm looking at it right now. There must be some mistake." A pause, keyboard clicking. "Can you describe the person who was driving your vehicle earlier today?" And suddenly, Ethan understood. Someone had seen Emma driving his car, had called the police, had assumed she was a car thief because of how she looked, who she was, the assumptions people made about young women in worn clothes driving cars that didn't match their appearance. "Her name is Emma Carver," Ethan said carefully. "I gave her permission to use my car. She returned it exactly as promised." "You gave permission to—" Officer Martinez sounded skeptical. "Sir, the person who called this in said the driver appeared to be homeless or in distress." "She was neither. She was someone I trusted with my property, and she returned it safely. There's no crime here." More keyboard clicking. "All right, Mr. Brooks. I'll update the report. But for future reference, if you're lending your vehicle to someone, you might want to provide them with written authorization. Saves everyone a lot of trouble." "I'll remember that," Ethan said. "Thank you, officer." After he hung up, Ethan sat on his couch, staring at nothing. Someone had seen Emma and immediately assumed the worst. Had called the police on her for the crime of existing in a car that didn't match their expectations. How many times had that happened to her? How many times had she been invisible until suddenly she was threatening? Until her mere presence was treated as suspicious? And yet she'd still brought the car back, still kept her promise, still trusted that Ethan wouldn't turn out to be another person who hurt her. At 6:15 p.m., Ethan drove to the soccer complex where Maya's team played their home games. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air had that perfect autumn coolness that made everything feel possible. He spotted Maya warming up with her team, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she ran drills. When she saw him, her whole face lit up. "Dad, you made it!" She ran over and hugged him, and Ethan held her tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo and grass stains and everything that made her his daughter, his anchor, the reason he kept trying even when everything else felt pointless. "I promised, didn't I?" he said. "Yeah, but you've been really busy. I thought maybe the business thing was today. It got moved to tomorrow, but even if it hadn't—" He pulled back to look at her face. "I would have been here. You're more important than any business deal." Maya studied him with those serious eyes that saw more than an 11-year-old should have to see. "Did something happen, Dad? You seem different." "I met someone today who reminded me what matters." "Was she pretty?" Ethan laughed, surprised. "It wasn't like that. She was just someone who needed help, and helping her helped me remember some things I'd forgotten." "Like what?" "Like trusting people, like showing up, like being the kind of person you'd be proud to have as a father." Maya hugged him again. "I'm already proud of you, Dad." "I know, sweetheart, but I want to deserve it more often." The game started at 6:30, and Ethan watched from the sidelines with the other parents. Maya played midfielder, and she was good, quick and smart, seeing plays develop before they happened, making passes that created opportunities her teammates sometimes failed to capitalize on. In the second half, with the score tied 2-2, Maya intercepted a pass near midfield. She dribbled forward, drawing two defenders, then slipped the ball to her teammate Sarah on the wing. Sarah crossed it back to Maya, who'd continued her run into the box. Maya met the ball perfectly with her right foot and sent it into the upper corner of the net. The parents erupted in cheers. Ethan found himself shouting, jumping, celebrating like he was 10 years old again, and the world was full of wonder. Maya's teammates mobbed her, And when she looked over at the sidelines and saw him there, saw him celebrating her moment, her smile was so bright it hurt to look at. That's when Ethan finally understood what Emma's letter had been trying to tell him. Success wasn't about the deals you closed or the money you made or the control you maintained over an increasingly chaotic world. It was about being present for the moments that mattered. It was about seeing people, really seeing them, and choosing to show up even when it was inconvenient, even when it was scary, even when every instinct told you to protect yourself instead. After the game, Maya's team won 4-2. They went out for ice cream. Maya talked excitedly about the goal, about how she'd been practicing that exact play with Sarah all week, about how the other team's goalkeeper had been cheating to her left side all game. Ethan listened, really listened, instead of checking his phone or thinking about work or mentally reviewing his presentation. He was just there, present, eating ice cream with his daughter on a Tuesday night in October, and it felt like the most important thing he'd done in years. On the drive home, Maya said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why did Mom leave?" The question hit him like a punch to the sternum. They'd had versions of this conversation before, but Maya had always accepted his careful, sanitized answers. The fact that she was asking again meant she was ready for something closer to the truth. "Your mom and I wanted different things," Ethan said slowly. "I thought I was being a good husband by working all the time, by building a career, by providing for our family. But what she needed was someone who was actually present, someone who didn't treat her like another item on his to-do list. But you're different now." "I'm trying to be. It's hard, though. I spent so long thinking that success meant control, that if I just planned everything perfectly and worked hard enough, I could protect us from anything bad happening. But life doesn't work that way." "Is that what the lady today taught you?" Ethan glanced over at her, surprised. "How did you know it was a lady?" Maya grinned. "You said she when you were talking about helping someone." "Smart kid." "I know. So what did she teach you?" Ethan thought about Emma sitting on the airport floor, about the way she'd refused his money but accepted his trust, about the letter she'd left and the promise she'd kept. "She taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in someone when you have no reason to, and that showing up for the people who matter is more important than any achievement or success." "Even the big business thing tomorrow?" "Even that. If the deal doesn't work out, I'll find other clients. But if I miss your games, if I'm not there for the moments that matter to you, I can't get those back." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart." That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat in his home office reviewing his presentation one final time. But instead of obsessing over every slide, every word, every potential question, he found himself thinking about the story he needed to tell. Not the story about market share and competitive advantages. The real story, about what his company actually did, why it mattered, how it helped people solve real problems. The human story underneath all the data and projections. He rewrote the opening, stripping away the jargon and speaking plainly about the challenge his clients faced, the solution he'd developed, the results they'd achieved. It wasn't as polished as the version he'd practiced 50 times. But it was honest. It was real. At midnight, Ethan finally closed his laptop and pulled out Emma's letter one more time. He read it slowly, savoring the words, trying to imagine what courage it had taken for her to ask for help, what trust she'd shown in keeping her promise when she could have easily disappeared. He wondered where she was now. On a bus to Portland, maybe. Or in a friend's car, watching the landscape change outside the window, carrying her mother's box and the hope of a fresh start. Ethan picked up his phone and composed a text to the unknown number Emma had used to contact him. "Thank you for teaching me what trust really means. I hope Portland is everything you need it to be. You deserve every good thing that's coming." He sent it, knowing she probably wouldn't see it, that the number was likely a borrowed phone or a temporary connection. But it felt important to say it anyway, to put the gratitude into words even if they never reached her. His phone buzzed almost immediately. He grabbed it, heart racing. But it was just David Chen. "See you at 9 a.m. Pacific. Conference room B. Don't be late." Ethan smiled. "I'll be there," he typed back. And this time, he meant it. Not because the deal was everything, but because he'd learned that showing up mattered. that keeping promises mattered, that trusting people enough to be vulnerable, whether it was a stranger in an airport or a board of executives or his own daughter, was the only way forward. He set his alarm for 4:30 a.m. The red-eye flight left at 11:47 p.m., which meant he needed to be at the airport by 10 o'clock. Plenty of time to put Maya to bed, drive to O'Hare, catch his flight, and arrive in San Francisco refreshed and ready. As he lay in bed trying to quiet his mind enough to sleep, Ethan realized that the tightness in his chest was completely gone. The anxiety that had been his constant companion for 3 years had lifted, replaced by something else. Not confidence exactly, not certainty, but maybe something better. Acceptance that he couldn't control everything, and that was okay. That sometimes the best you could do was trust, show up, and hope that your integrity mattered more than your fear. Outside his window, Chicago hummed with its endless nighttime energy. Somewhere in that vast city, Emma Carver was beginning a new chapter of her life. And somewhere in this apartment, Ethan Brooks was finally learning how to be present for his own. He fell asleep thinking about tomorrow's presentation, about Maya's soccer game, about the weight of car keys in his palm and the leap of faith required to hand them to a stranger. And for the first time in years, he slept soundly, deeply, without the dreams of falling that had haunted him since the divorce. When the alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., Ethan woke feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Ready. The red-eye flight touched down at San Francisco International at 6:42 a.m. Pacific Time, 18 minutes ahead of schedule. Ethan hadn't slept much on the plane. Couldn't really, with his mind cycling through the presentation, replaying yesterday's events, thinking about the way Emma's hands had trembled when she'd taken his keys and the way Maya's face had lit up when she'd scored that goal. He'd kissed Maya goodbye while she was still sleeping, just like the morning before, her blonde hair spilling across the pillow in the pre-dawn darkness. But this time he'd left a note on her nightstand. Scored the winning goal yesterday, crushing this presentation today. We're both winners. Love you forever, Dad. The Uber from SFO to Meridian Technologies headquarters in Palo Alto took 37 minutes through morning traffic. Ethan watched the Bay Area slide past his window, tech campuses with their carefully manicured lawns and ambitious architecture, billboards advertising cloud solutions and AI platforms, the whole machinery of Silicon Valley humming with the certainty that the future was being built right here, right now. His phone buzzed as they pulled into Meridian's parking lot. A text from David Chen. "You're early. Good sign. Come to the main lobby. I'll meet you there." Ethan paid the driver and stood for a moment looking up at the building. Meridian Technologies occupied a sleek glass structure that reflected the morning sun like a prism, creating rainbow patterns on the concrete below. The company's logo, a stylized compass rose, was embedded in the glass entrance, suggesting navigation, direction, certainty in an uncertain world. Everything Ethan had told himself he needed to succeed. David met him in the lobby exactly as promised. He was younger than Ethan had expected from their phone conversations, maybe 40, with the lean build of someone who took expensive spin classes and the subtle gray in his hair that suggested wisdom without age. He wore dark jeans and a button-down shirt with no tie, the uniform of tech executives who wanted to appear approachable while maintaining authority. "Ethan Brooks," David said, extending his hand. "Good to finally meet in person. How was the flight?" "Smooth," Ethan said, shaking his hand. David's grip was firm, assessing. "Thank you again for the flexibility on timing. Made it to your daughter's game?" "I did. She scored the winning goal." David's expression softened. "My daughter played soccer too. I missed most of her games." He gestured toward the elevators. "Conference room's on the 5th floor. The board is gathering now. You'll have about 20 minutes to set up before we start." They rode the elevator in silence. Ethan could feel David studying him, evaluating, trying to determine if his confidence in recommending Ethan Brooks to the board was about to be validated or humiliated. "Can I ask you something?" David said as the elevator doors opened. "Yesterday, when you called to reschedule, you said you had something more important than an $800,000 contract. Did you mean that?" Ethan met his eyes. "Yes." "Why?" The question hung between them as they walked down a hallway lined with photos of Meridian's various product launches, team celebrations, charitable initiatives. In one image, David stood with a group of employees holding a giant check for a children's hospital. In another, the executive team posed in front of their NASDAQ listing. Because I've spent the last 3 years trying to rebuild my life by controlling everything, Ethan said slowly. Working constantly, measuring every risk, protecting myself from failure. And yesterday I met someone who reminded me that the things you can't control, trust, presence, showing up for people who matter, those are what actually make life worth living. David stopped walking. The girl in the airport, he said. The one you mentioned. How did you... I looked you up after our call, found an incident report from Chicago PD about a possible stolen vehicle registered to your name. Took some reading between the lines, but I pieced together that you'd lent your car to someone, and a concerned citizen had reported it. David's eyes were sharp, curious. That took guts. Or stupidity. I'm still deciding which. Maybe both, Ethan admitted. And she brought it back? With a full tank of gas and a letter explaining how much it meant to her. David nodded slowly, like Ethan had just confirmed something he'd suspected. Come on, he said. Let's go show the board what you've got. Well, Conference Room B was a glass-walled space overlooking the bay, with a massive table that could seat 20 people and video screens covering one entire wall. 6 board members were already seated, ranging from a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes to a young man who couldn't have been older than 35, probably a venture capital wunderkind who'd made his fortune before he could legally rent a car. David made introductions. Margaret Thornton, board chair and former CEO of a major telecommunications company. James Exu, CFO of a hedge fund. Sarah Patel, technology strategist who'd helped launch 3 successful startups. Marcus Webb, the young investor. Robert Chen, no relation to David, who'd built and sold a cybersecurity firm for 9 figures. And finally, Dr. Ellen Rodriguez, chief innovation officer at a pharmaceutical company. They were impressive, intimidating, the kind of people who made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions in shareholder value. The kind of people Ethan had been preparing to impress for 3 years. He set up his laptop, connected it to the display system, pulled up his presentation. His hands were steadier than he'd expected. Margaret Thornton glanced at her watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary, and said, Mr. Brooks, we have until 10:30. David's been singing your praises, so we're looking forward to seeing what you've brought us. Whenever you're ready. Ethan looked at the opening slide he'd rewritten at midnight. No fancy graphics, no market jargon, just a simple question in white text on a blue background. What happens when the systems we depend on fail? He took a breath and began. 3 years ago, my marriage failed, he said. My wife left because I'd spent so many years working, building, climbing, that I'd forgotten to actually be present for the life we were supposedly building together. The divorce was brutal. Split custody, legal fees, the slow realization that I'd sacrificed the things that mattered for achievements that suddenly felt hollow. He clicked to the next slide. It showed a simple graph. Uptime versus downtime. Reliability versus failure. The binary that defined enterprise systems. In my personal life, I failed because I focused on the wrong metrics. I measured hours worked instead of moments present, revenue instead of relationship, the appearance of success instead of the reality of connection. Ethan looked directly at Margaret. The same thing happens in business. We measure uptime, but we don't measure what that uptime actually enables. We track system reliability, but we forget that systems exist to serve people. He could see them leaning forward slightly, engaged despite themselves. These were people who'd heard thousands of pitches, sat through countless presentations. They knew every trick, every rhetorical strategy. But Ethan wasn't performing a trick. He was telling the truth. The presentation evolved from there, slides showing real clients, real problems, real solutions. But instead of hiding behind technical specifications and ROI calculations, Ethan told stories. The hospital whose electronic health record system had crashed during a crisis, putting patients at risk. The financial services company whose trading platform had failed, costing millions in a single afternoon. The manufacturing firm whose supply chain visibility had disappeared at exactly the wrong moment. And in each case, he showed how his consulting approach didn't just fix the technical problem. It addressed the human dimension, the fear, the uncertainty, the need for systems that didn't just work, but that people could trust. Yesterday morning, I gave my car keys to a stranger, Ethan said, clicking to a slide that showed nothing but those words. The board members exchanged glances. This clearly wasn't a normal presentation. A young woman I'd never met asked to borrow my vehicle. Every rational calculation said no. The risk was enormous. The trust was unwarranted. But I gave her the keys anyway. Sarah Patel spoke for the first time. Why? Because she needed help, and I had the ability to provide it. Because trust isn't about certainty, it's about courage. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is choose to believe in someone even when the data suggests you shouldn't. Ethan advanced to the next slide, which showed the core philosophy of his approach. Systems are only as reliable as the trust they enable. When you hire a consulting firm to improve your enterprise systems, you're not just buying technical expertise. You're buying trust. You're trusting that we understand your business, that we'll deliver what we promise, that we won't disappear when things get complicated. He looked at each board member in turn. And the only way to build that trust is to actually be trustworthy, to show up, to keep promises, to care about outcomes instead of just billable hours. Marcus Webb, the young investor, raised his hand slightly. So what happened? Did the woman bring your car back? She did. With a full tank of gas and a letter explaining how much it meant to her. She kept her promise because I chose to trust her, and that trust changed both of our lives. But what if she hadn't? James Kshu, the hedge fund CFO, looked skeptical. What if your trust had been misplaced? Then I would have learned an expensive lesson about risk assessment, Ethan said. But I also would have known that I'd tried to help someone who needed it, that I'd chosen humanity over fear. And honestly, that might have been worth the cost of a used Honda. The room was quiet. Ethan could feel the presentation balanced on a knife's edge. He'd either completely won them over or catastrophically alienated them. There was no middle ground. Margaret Thornton leaned back in her chair, studying him with those sharp eyes that had probably evaluated hundreds of executives, thousands of proposals, countless opportunities. Walk us through a specific technical challenge you solved, she said. Something complex. I want to understand how this philosophy translates to actual methodology. Ethan spent the next 45 minutes doing exactly that. He showed them the architecture he'd designed for a healthcare client, the redundancy systems he'd built for a financial services firm, the monitoring protocols that had prevented catastrophic failures. But he didn't just present the technical solutions. He showed how each decision was rooted in understanding the humans who would use these systems, the pressure they were under, the consequences of failure. Dr. Rodriguez asked about scalability. Robert Chen challenged his cost assumptions. Sarah Patel wanted to know about his team structure, whether he could actually deliver on contracts this size. Marcus Webb grilled him on competitive positioning. Ethan answered each question directly, honestly, without the usual consultant's habit of deflecting difficult inquiries with jargon. When he didn't know something, he said so and explained how he'd find the answer. When they pushed back on his estimates, he showed his calculations and invited them to identify flaws in his reasoning. At 10:47, 17 minutes past the scheduled end time, Margaret Thornton stood up. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. This was not what I expected. Ethan couldn't read her expression. In a good way or a bad way? I'm not sure yet. David will be in touch. She nodded to the other board members and left the conference room, her Patek Philippe catching the morning light. One by one, the others followed. Sarah Patel paused at the door. That story about the car, she said. Was it true? Every word. She smiled slightly. I believe you. That's either very smart or very dangerous in this business. Then she was gone. David walked Ethan back to the lobby, his expression unreadable. They stood near the glass entrance with the Compass Rose logo, morning sun creating patterns on the polished floor. Well, Ethan said, I either just landed the biggest client of my career or completely destroyed any chance of working in enterprise consulting again. David laughed. A genuine sound, not the practiced chuckle of networking events. You certainly gave them something to think about. Did I screw it up? Honestly, I don't know. Margaret's impossible to read. David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked back at Ethan with an expression of pure surprise. Hang on. He stepped away, taking a call. Ethan watched through the glass entrance as morning traffic built up on the street outside. People heading to work, living their lives, most of them probably not waiting to hear whether they'd just won or lost an $800,000 contract. His phone rang, Maya, calling during her lunch period at school. Dad, how did it go? I don't know yet. I gave the presentation, answered their questions. Now I wait. Did you tell them about the lady in the car? Ethan smiled. I did. Was that weird? Very weird, but also honest. I think they appreciated that, even if they didn't know what to do with it. Well, I'm proud of you either way. Oh, and Dad, Sarah's mom asked if I want to sleep over Friday night. Can I? Of course. We'll figure out the details tonight. Okay. Love you. Gotta go. Lunch is almost over. Love you too, sweetheart. David was walking back toward him, phone still in hand, his expression now carefully neutral in a way that made Ethan's stomach clench. Margaret wants to see you again, David said. Right now, just you and her, no other board members. Is that good or bad? With Margaret, could go either way. Conference room A, one floor down. I'll show you. They took the elevator down in silence. David led him to a smaller conference room, this one with a view of the courtyard rather than the bay. Margaret Thornton was already there, standing by the window with her arms crossed. I'll leave you two to talk, David said, and disappeared before Ethan could respond. Margaret turned to face him. Sit down, Mr. Brooks. Ethan sat. His heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. I've been on this board for 7 years, Margaret said. In that time, I've sat through approximately 300 presentations from consultants, vendors, service providers. Do you know how many of them told me a personal story about trust and vulnerability? I'm guessing not many. 0. Not one. She moved away from the window and sat down across from him. Most consultants spend their entire presentation trying to convince me they're the smartest person in the room, that they have all the answers, that hiring them is a risk-free proposition. That's because they're trying to sell you certainty, which doesn't exist. No, Ethan agreed. It doesn't. Margaret studied him for a long moment. The story about the car, that actually happened yesterday? Yes, ma'am. And you're aware that sharing a personal story about giving your vehicle to a homeless stranger in a high-stakes business presentation is professionally unconventional. I am. So why did you do it? Ethan thought about Emma's letter, about Maya's soccer game, about the 3 years he'd spent trying to rebuild his life on a foundation of control and certainty that had never actually existed. Because the alternative was lying, he said simply. Not with false data or made-up case studies, but lying about who I am and what I believe. And I'm tired of pretending that success is about having all the answers instead of being willing to trust people, show up when it matters, and keep your promises even when it's hard. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. I lost my husband 2 years ago. Cancer. The last 6 months of his life, I barely saw him. I was traveling constantly, board meetings, speaking engagements, consulting work, making money we didn't need so I could feel successful. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the weight beneath it. He died while I was giving a keynote speech in London about effective leadership. I found out when I landed. 11 hours too late to say goodbye. I'm so sorry. My point is, Mr. Brooks, I understand what you're talking about. The way we sacrifice presence for achievement. The way we measure everything except what actually matters. She pulled out her phone and tapped something. I'm sending you a contract, 3-month trial engagement, $200,000. If your methodology works as well as you claim, we'll expand to the full scope we discussed. Ethan's mind reeled. 3 months? That's not what you were hoping for, I know. You wanted the full contract, the certainty, the big win. But here's what I'm offering instead. A chance to prove that your approach actually works. That trust and presence and showing up translate to measurable business outcomes. Can you deliver on that? Yes. Even knowing the full contract isn't guaranteed? Even knowing that. Margaret stood up and extended her hand. Then we have a deal. David will work out the details. Start date is 2 weeks from Monday. Don't be late. Ethan shook her hand, still trying to process what had just happened. He'd walked into this presentation expecting either complete success or total failure, the binary outcome he'd been trained to pursue. Instead, he'd gotten something more complex, more uncertain, more real. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead." "Why did you decide to take a chance on me?" Margaret smiled, the first time he'd seen her expression soften. "Because yesterday you gave your car keys to a stranger based on nothing but trust. And today you walked into a board meeting and told the truth instead of the story you thought we wanted to hear. That kind of courage is rare. It's also exactly what we need." She left the conference room, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the view of the courtyard where Meridian employees were taking their morning coffee breaks, talking and laughing and living their lives. He pulled out his phone and texted Maya. "Got the contract. Well, part of it. It's complicated, but good. See you tonight." She responded immediately. "Yes! So proud of you, Dad." Then he texted David. "Thank you for believing in me, for giving me the chance to show up." David's response took a few minutes. "You earned it. Now don't make me regret sticking my neck out. First meeting is Thursday. Calendar invite incoming." Ethan sat there for a while, looking at his phone, thinking about the strange path that had led him to this moment. The missed flight, Emma Carver asking for an impossible favor, Maya's soccer game, the decision to rewrite his presentation at midnight, stripping away the performance and speaking the truth. None of it had gone according to plan. The carefully constructed vision he'd had for this week, fly to San Francisco, deliver the perfect presentation, land the contract, return home victorious, had dissolved the moment traffic stopped on the Kennedy Expressway. Everything since then had been improvisation, trust, choosing to show up even when he didn't know how things would end. And somehow, impossibly, it had worked. His phone rang. Unknown number. For a wild second, Ethan thought it might be Emma, that she'd somehow sensed his success and called to congratulate him. "Hello? Mr. Brooks? This is Linda Kowalski. I called you yesterday about Emma?" "Of course. Is everything all right?" "I just wanted to let you know she made it to Portland safely. She called me last night from her cousin's place. Wanted to make sure I thanked you again for helping her." "How is she doing?" "Better. She's got a job interview tomorrow at a coffee shop, and her cousin's helping her get back on her feet." "That box you helped her retrieve?" She said it reminded her who she used to be before everything fell apart. Gave her hope she could be that person again. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. "I'm glad. Will you tell her I said good luck? If you talk to her again?" "I will." "And Mr. Brooks? What you did yesterday, lending her your car when you had every reason not to, that was something special. People don't do that kind of thing anymore." "Maybe they should." "Maybe. Take care of yourself." The line went dead. Ethan sat in the conference room, thinking about Emma starting over in Portland, about Maya scoring goals and believing in her father, about Margaret Thornton choosing to trust him based on a story about car keys and courage. The world felt different somehow. Not fixed. It was still complicated, still full of uncertainty and risk and the possibility of failure. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the goal wasn't to eliminate uncertainty, but to build the courage to face it, to trust that showing up mattered, even when you couldn't control the outcome. David appeared in the doorway. "You still here? I thought you'd be halfway to the airport by now, celebrating." "Just thinking." "About what?" Ethan gestured at the view, the employees in the courtyard, the whole ecosystem of Meridian Technologies humming with purpose. "About how none of this would have happened if I hadn't missed my flight yesterday. If that accident hadn't trapped me on the expressway. If I hadn't met Emma and made a choice that every rational instinct told me was stupid." "You think it was fate?" "I think it was chance. But what I did with that chance, that was choice. And maybe that's what matters. Not the things we can't control, but how we respond when our plans fall apart." David nodded slowly. "You know what I like about you, Ethan? Most consultants would have walked in here telling me how they were going to save Meridian, fix all our problems, make us more profitable. You walked in and told us a story about failure and trust and showing up. That takes guts." "Or stupidity. You said you were still deciding." "I've decided. It's guts." David checked his watch. "You should head to the airport." Margaret wants a detailed proposal by end of week, and that's not going to write itself. Ethan stood, gathering his laptop and briefcase. As he headed for the elevator, he passed by the photos lining the hallway again. All those moments of success, team celebrations, product launches. But now he noticed other details. The tired eyes and some of the smiling faces. The empty spaces where people had probably left the company, moved on, burned out. The cost of achievement written in subtle ways across every image. Success, he realized, wasn't about avoiding those costs. It was about deciding which costs were worth paying. The Uber ride back to SFO took 43 minutes through late morning traffic. Ethan spent the drive thinking about the proposal Margaret wanted, the 3-month timeline, the challenge of proving his methodology actually worked. It was daunting, uncertain, exactly the kind of risk the old Ethan would have tried to eliminate through careful planning and contingency protocols. But the new Ethan, or maybe just the more honest Ethan, understood that some risks were worth taking. That trust had to come before certainty, that showing up mattered more than having all the answers. At the airport, he had 3 hours before his flight. He found a quiet corner in the terminal and pulled out his laptop, intending to start sketching the proposal. But instead, he found himself opening a new document and typing a different kind of message. Dear Emma, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm sending it to Linda's email and asking her to forward it to you if she can. I just wanted you to know that the trust you showed in keeping your promise changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. This morning I gave a presentation that could define the next phase of my career. I told the board about lending you my car, about choosing trust over certainty, about what it means to show up even when you're scared. And they believed me. They gave me a chance based on that story, based on the courage you demonstrated in asking for help and the integrity you showed in honoring your word. I hope Portland is treating you well. I hope your job interview goes perfectly. I hope you're rebuilding your life with the same courage you showed on that airport floor. Thank you for reminding me what matters. Thank you for trusting me with your story. Thank you for bringing back my car with a full tank of gas and a letter that I'll probably keep in my wallet until it falls apart. You said not to look for you, so I won't. But I'll remember Emma Carver as the stranger who taught Ethan Brooks how to be human again. With gratitude and hope for your future, Ethan. Ethan. He sent the email to Linda, then closed his laptop and sat back in the uncomfortable airport chair, watching travelers rush past toward their gates, their destinations, their carefully planned lives. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Sarah's mom said yes to the sleepover. Can we get pizza tonight to celebrate your contract? Ethan smiled and typed back, absolutely, you pick the toppings. Another text. This one from David. Margaret just told me what she offered you. 3 months might seem like a test, but it's actually more than that. It's Margaret's way of saying she believes in you but wants to protect the company. Deliver on this and the full contract is yours. No pressure, though, no pressure. Ethan almost laughed at the absurdity. But underneath David's sarcasm was something genuine. Belief, support, the kind of partnership that made difficult challenges feel possible. The afternoon unfolded slowly. Ethan worked on preliminary ideas for the proposal, mapping out the first 90 days, identifying quick wins that would build trust with Meridian's team. But he also allowed himself to just sit, to think, to process everything that had happened in the last 36 hours. At 3:47 p.m., his phone rang with a Chicago area code he didn't recognize. Hello? Ethan Brooks? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Speaking. This is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Chicago Hope Medical Center. I'm the director of our Information Systems Department. Your name was referred to me by someone named Emma Carver. She said you helped her recently and that you're excellent at building reliable systems with integrity. Ethan sat up straight. Emma referred you? Yes. She works at a coffee shop near the hospital, just started this week, and we were talking about our IT challenges. She mentioned your name and gave me your contact information. I hope that's all right? Of course. What can I help you with? We're looking for a consultant to help us redesign our patient record system. Security and reliability are critical, obviously. Emma said you understand that technology is really about trust. That resonated with me. Dr. Martinez paused. Do you have time to discuss this further? Ethan thought about his schedule, about the Meridian contract, about the complexity of taking on another major client. The old Ethan would have calculated capacity, analyzed bandwidth, determined whether he could realistically deliver on multiple commitments. The new Ethan just said, "Yes, I'd love to help." They talked for 20 minutes about the hospital's needs, the timeline, the budget constraints. Doctor Martinez was sharp, asking good questions, clearly someone who understood both the technical and human dimensions of what they needed. "Emma speaks very highly of you," Dr. Martinez said as the call was winding down. "She said you showed her kindness when she needed it most. That kind of character matters to me when I'm choosing partners." "Emma's kindness showed me something I'd forgotten," Ethan said. "That trust is a choice worth making." After the call ended, Ethan sat holding his phone, marveling at the strange way the universe sometimes worked. He'd given Emma his car keys expecting nothing in return, and now she'd sent him a potential client, a new opportunity, proof that kindness could be reciprocal even when you didn't ask for reciprocation. The boarding announcement for his flight crackled over the airport speakers. Ethan gathered his things and joined the line of passengers waiting to board. As he handed his ticket to the gate agent, he looked back at the terminal one last time, thinking about yesterday morning, about the accident and the missed flight, and the young woman sitting on the floor with everything she owned in a worn backpack. If that accident had never happened, if traffic had flowed normally, if he'd made his original flight, none of this would have happened. He would have given his presentation, probably failed to land the contract because his approach was too generic, and returned home feeling like he'd wasted years of work. Instead, he'd learned to trust, to show up, to believe that presence mattered more than control. The plane lifted off into the California afternoon, climbing above the bay and banking east toward home. Ethan pressed his forehead against the window, watching San Francisco shrink below him, all those lives and stories and moments happening simultaneously in the vast sprawl of the city. Somewhere down there, decisions were being made that would change everything. Marriages ending, careers beginning. People choosing trust or fear, presence or absence, the easy lie or the difficult truth. And in a coffee shop in Portland, Emma Carver was probably pouring coffee and learning her new job and carrying a box of memories that proved she'd once belonged somewhere, that she could belong somewhere again. Ethan closed his eyes and let himself rest, truly rest, for the first time in years. The contract was uncertain, the future was unpredictable. His carefully constructed plans had dissolved into something messier, more complex, more real. And somehow, finally, that felt exactly right. The plane landed at O'Hare at 9:23 p.m. Chicago time, the wheels touching down with that familiar jolt that meant home, meant Maya, meant the life he was learning to live differently. Ethan's phone buzzed the moment the aircraft reached the gate, messages flooding in as the device reconnected to the cellular network. Maya: "Pizza's in the fridge. I saved you 3 slices. Also, I have big news, but you have to hear it in person." David Chen: "Margaret just emailed the entire board. She's impressed. Don't mess this up." And then, unexpectedly, from the unknown number Emma had used days ago: "This is Emma. Linda gave me your email. Thank you for your message. You didn't have to do that. I'm doing okay. Portland is cold but good. Starting to remember what hope feels like. The job interview went well. I start Monday. Your letter meant more than you know. I won't forget you either." Ethan read Emma's message 3 times, standing in the aisle while other passengers shuffled past him, dragging their carry-ons toward the exit. Something in his chest loosened, a knot he hadn't realized was still there, the last remaining doubt about whether his choice had mattered, whether trust had been worth the risk. She was okay. She was starting over. The promise she'd kept had rippled forward into a new life. He texted back quickly: "So glad to hear it. You earned that fresh start. Proud of you for having the courage to ask for help. That takes real strength." By the time he reached baggage claim, she'd responded, "Funny, I was going to say the same thing to you. Takes strength to trust someone when you have every reason not to. You're going to do great things with Meridian. I can feel it." The Uber ride home took 38 minutes through late evening traffic. Chicago looked different somehow, the familiar skyline sharper against the night sky. The streets alive with people heading to late dinners or coming home from second shifts, or just existing in the vast ecosystem of the city. How many of them were making choices right now, Ethan wondered, between fear and trust, between protecting themselves and showing up for someone who needed them. Maya was waiting in the living room when he walked through the door, still awake despite it being past her bedtime on a school night. She launched herself at him in a hug that nearly knocked him backward. "Dad, you're home. Tell me everything." Ethan dropped his bags and hugged her tight. "I thought you had big news for me." "Mine can wait." "Did you get the contract? Was the presentation amazing? Did they love the car story?" He settled onto the couch, and Maya curled up next to him, her head on his shoulder the way she used to when she was little, before the divorce had made everything complicated. "I got a trial contract," he said. 3 months to prove my approach works. If I deliver, they'll expand it to the full scope." "That's good though, right?" "It's better than good. It's honest. They're not buying a guarantee, they're buying trust. And I have to earn it." Maya was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said, "You're different, Dad. Since yesterday. You seem lighter." "I feel lighter. Turns out carrying around all that fear and control is exhausting." "So what changed?" Ethan thought about how to explain it, about Emma and the car keys and Margaret Thornton's story about missing her husband's death, about the way trust required vulnerability and vulnerability required courage, and courage required accepting that you couldn't control everything. "I stopped trying to protect myself from failing," he said finally, "and started focusing on showing up, even when I'm scared. Like coming to my soccer game instead of doing the presentation." "Exactly like that," Maya grinned. "Well, I'm glad you're figuring this out. Mom called today, by the way." Ethan's stomach tightened reflexively. "What did she say?" "She wanted to know how you were doing. Said she heard through someone that you were working on a big opportunity. I told her about your presentation and how you chose my game over the meeting." Maya paused. "She said that didn't sound like you." "What did you say?" "I told her you're changing, becoming more like the dad I need, instead of the dad you think you should be." Maya looked up at him with those serious eyes that were so much older than 11. "Was that okay to say?" Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, a different kind of vulnerability than what he'd experienced with Emma or Margaret. This was his daughter seeing him clearly, articulating truths he was only beginning to understand himself. "That was perfect to say," he managed. "What was your big news?" Maya's whole face lit up. "Okay, so you know how I've been working on that essay for the Young Writers Competition? The one about family and change?" "Of course." "I won. They announced it today. First place in the middle school division. There's a ceremony next month, and I get to read my essay in front of everyone, and there's a scholarship prize, and—" She stopped, suddenly anxious. "You'll be there, right? For the ceremony?" "Maya, I wouldn't miss it for anything. Even if Meridian needs you? Even then, I promise." She studied his face, weighing whether this promise was different from the ones he'd broken before. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her because she relaxed back against his shoulder. "The essay was about you," she said quietly. "About watching you try to rebuild after the divorce. About how you've been so focused on not failing that you forgot to actually live. About how I've been waiting for you to figure out that being present is more important than being perfect." Ethan's vision blurred. "Can I read it?" "Tomorrow. It's in my room, and I'm too tired to get it now, but Dad?" She looked up at him. "I'm really proud of you, for changing, for trying, for being brave enough to trust that lady with your car even though it was scary. I'm proud of you too, for writing that essay, for winning, for being patient with me while I figured things out." They sat there in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that only exists between people who truly know each other. Outside, Chicago hummed with its endless nighttime energy. Inside, a father and daughter were learning to trust each other again. Eventually, Maya went to bed, and Ethan found himself sitting alone in the living room, thinking about the week that had just unfolded. 3 days ago, he'd been a man who measured success by contracts and control, who'd rebuilt his life as a fortress against vulnerability. Now, he was someone who'd handed car keys to a stranger, told a board of directors about trust instead of technical specifications, and chosen his daughter's soccer game over professional advancement. And somehow, impossibly, everything was working out better than his carefully controlled plans ever had. His phone buzzed. An email from Margaret Thornton sent at 11:47 p.m. Pacific Time. The subject line read, Framework for Trust. Ethan opened it with trembling fingers. Mr. Brooks, I've been thinking about your presentation all day. Not the technical aspects. Those were competent, but not exceptional. What stayed with me was your central premise, that systems are only as reliable as the trust they enable. I want to expand our agreement. In addition to the technical consulting work, I'd like you to help us redesign how Meridian approaches our entire client relationship model. We've been so focused on product features and market positioning that we've forgotten we're in the business of building trust. This would add $300,000 to the contract, but it would also require you to spend significant time here in Palo Alto. Probably 2 weeks per month for the duration of the engagement. I know you have a daughter, and that presence matters to you. I'm not asking you to sacrifice that. I'm asking if there's a way to structure this so you can deliver for us while still showing up for her. Think about it. Let me know by Friday. Margaret Ethan read the email twice, then a third time. This was the opportunity he'd been working toward for 3 years. Not just a contract, but a chance to fundamentally reshape how a major company thought about trust and relationships. The kind of work that could define a career, that could transform his small consulting practice into something significant. But 2 weeks per month in California meant 2 weeks away from Maya, meant missing games, missing dinners, missing the everyday moments that he'd finally learned mattered more than achievement. The old Ethan would have said yes immediately, would have figured out the logistics later, would have convinced himself that the sacrifice was worth it. The new Ethan sat with the discomfort, thinking about what was actually being asked and whether there was a way to do it without betraying the lessons he'd learned. At midnight, he was still sitting there, his laptop open, drafting and deleting responses to Margaret's email. Finally, he wrote, "Margaret, I'm honored by your confidence and excited about the expanded scope, but I need to be honest about the challenge. 2 weeks per month away from my daughter would break a promise I made to myself and to her about being present. What if we structured it differently? I could come to Palo Alto for intensive work weeks, Monday through Thursday, twice a month, and handle the rest remotely. Combined with strategic video conferences and asynchronous collaboration, I believe we could achieve the same outcomes while allowing me to be home for my daughter's weekends and most weekday evenings. This might not work for you, and I'll understand if you need someone who can commit to longer on-site periods. But I'm learning that the only way to build trust with clients is to first honor the trust my daughter places in me. Let me know if this alternative could work." Ethan. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, before fear could convince him to accept terms that would require him to compromise the very principles he'd just spent 3 days discovering. The response came 6 minutes later. "Ethan, perfect. That's exactly the kind of thinking I want you bringing to this work. Someone who will tell me the truth instead of what they think I want to hear. Monday through Thursday works. First session starts week after next. David will send the updated contract tomorrow. Get some sleep. You've earned it." Margaret Ethan closed his laptop and leaned back against the couch, overwhelmed by the sudden realization that trust worked both ways. He'd trusted Margaret enough to be honest about his constraints, and she'd trusted him enough to accommodate them. No negotiation, no compromise, just two people choosing to believe in each other's integrity. The next morning, Ethan woke to find Maya already at the kitchen table, eating cereal and reading her winning essay on her tablet. She looked up when he entered. "Morning, Dad. Coffee's ready. I made it strong because you look like you need it." "When did you become so wise?" "Probably around the time you started actually listening to me," she grinned. "Want to read my essay now?" Ethan poured coffee and sat down across from her. Maya handed him the tablet, suddenly nervous. "It's honest," she warned. "Maybe too honest. But Ms. Peterson said the best writing comes from truth." The essay was titled "Learning to Land." It began with a description of watching her father try to rebuild his life after divorce, comparing him to an airplane circling endlessly, afraid to touch down because landing meant accepting that the flight was over. She wrote about the promises he'd made and broken, about understanding that his absences came from fear rather than lack of love, about waiting for him to realize that being present required courage. And then she wrote about the soccer game, about seeing him in the stands when she'd expected him to be in San Francisco, about scoring the winning goal and looking over to find him celebrating, really celebrating, not checking his phone or thinking about work, but actually there in the moment with her. The essay ended with these words: "My dad is learning to land, not because the flight is over, but because he's finally brave enough to be where he is instead of where he thinks he should be. That's what I want to be when I grow up, someone brave enough to show up." Ethan set down the tablet, his vision blurred with tears he didn't bother hiding. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice rough, "and true, and I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out." Maya came around the table and hugged him. "You're figuring it out now. That's what matters." They spent the morning together, a rare weekday off for both of them. Ethan had cleared his schedule to decompress after the San Francisco trip, and Maya had a teacher planning day. They walked to the park, got ice cream despite it being barely above freezing, talked about everything and nothing. At one point, Maya asked, "Do you think you'll ever hear from that lady again? The one with the car?" "Emma? I don't know. She's starting a new life in Portland. Sometimes people need to move forward without looking back." "But you changed each other's lives." "We did, and maybe that's enough. Maybe not every connection has to last forever to matter." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "Like how Mom and you don't work together anymore, but you both still matter to each other because of me." The observation was so astute, so precisely articulated that Ethan had to stop walking. "When did you get so good at understanding people?" he asked. "I've been watching you, Dad, trying to figure out how adults navigate complicated things. You and Mom taught me that sometimes love isn't enough, but care can last even when love changes." They walked in silence for a while, father and daughter learning from each other in ways that had nothing to do with age or authority. That afternoon, while Maya was at Sarah's house, Ethan sat down to draft the proposal Margaret had requested. But instead of his usual approach, dense technical specifications and detailed project plans, he found himself writing something different: a philosophy document, a framework for how Meridian could rebuild their client relationships around trust instead of transactions. He wrote about the difference between reliability and dependability, between systems that worked and systems people could believe in. He wrote about transparency, about admitting limitations, about the courage required to say, "I don't know," instead of pretending omniscience. And he wrote about Emma, though he didn't use her name. The story of a stranger who'd asked for trust and honored it, who taught him that vulnerability was strength and that showing up mattered more than having all the answers. By the time Maya came home at 6, Ethan had written 17 pages. Not a traditional proposal, more like a manifesto for how businesses could operate with integrity in a world that rewarded shortcuts and showmanship. He sent it to Margaret with a simple note: "This might not be what you expected, but it's what I believe you need." Her response came an hour later: "This is exactly what I expected. Because now I know who you are. See you week after next." Friday morning brought the updated contract from Meridian, $500,000 total, structured payments, clear deliverables, and a schedule that honored Ethan's commitment to being home for Maya. He signed it electronically, then sat staring at his computer screen, trying to process that his business had just quintupled in size based on a philosophy he'd developed by giving his car to a homeless stranger. The hospital contract came through that afternoon, smaller, $75,000, but meaningful because Emma had referred it. Dr. Martinez wanted to start immediately, and her timeline aligned perfectly with the Meridian work. By Friday evening, Ethan Brooks, who 3 days ago had been desperately trying to land one major client, had contracts worth $575,000, and a calendar full of work that would challenge everything he thought he knew about consulting. He should have felt terrified, overwhelmed, certain he'd bitten off more than he could handle. Instead, he felt ready. Saturday morning, he took Maya to her soccer game. She scored 2 goals, and after the match, Coach Williams pulled him aside. "Whatever you said to Maya this week, keep saying it. She's playing with more confidence than I've ever seen, like she knows someone actually has her back." "I'm just trying to show up," Ethan said. "Well, it's working. Keep it up." That afternoon, Ethan's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Ethan Brooks?" "Speaking." "This is Rebecca." His ex-wife's voice still familiar despite the months since they'd last spoken directly. "Maya told me about your presentation, about choosing her game over the business meeting." Ethan's jaw tightened reflexively, old defensiveness rising. "Did she?" "I wanted to say I'm proud of you, for figuring out what I couldn't teach you when we were married." The words caught him completely off guard. "Rebecca, I'm not calling to rehash everything. I just... She paused, and he could hear something in her voice he hadn't heard in years. Vulnerability. I wanted you to know that watching you change, seeing you become more present for Maya, it means something. You're being the father she needs. I'm trying. I know. And Ethan, I'm sorry I left the way I did. Without giving you a chance to change first, I was so angry, so done, that I couldn't see you might be capable of becoming this person. You had every right to be angry. I wasn't there. Not really. No, you weren't, but you are now, and that matters more than the past. After they hung up, Ethan sat holding his phone, marveling at how forgiveness could arrive unexpectedly, how healing could happen in small moments of acknowledgement. Sunday he spent working on the Meridian proposal, refining his approach, mapping out the first 90 days. But he also took breaks to play board games with Maya, to make dinner together, to just exist in the apartment without the constant pressure to be productive. That evening, as Maya was getting ready for bed, she said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think the lady, Emma, do you think she knows how much she helped you?" Ethan thought about Emma's text, about her message that he was going to do great things with Meridian, about the way trust had rippled between them. "I think she knows, and I think maybe I helped her too. That's how trust works. It goes both ways." "Like us," Maya said. "You're learning to trust me to understand things, and I'm learning to trust you to show up." "Exactly like us." She hugged him goodnight, and Ethan stood in her doorway for a moment after she'd climbed into bed, watching her settle under the covers, her blonde hair spilling across the pillow the way it had that morning 4 days ago when he'd kissed her goodbye before the missed flight. So much had changed since then. He'd given his car to a stranger. He'd told a board of directors about vulnerability instead of technical expertise. He'd chosen presence over achievement. He'd signed contracts that would define the next phase of his career. He'd reconciled with his ex-wife. He'd learned that his daughter was wiser than he'd given her credit for. And underneath all of it, the fundamental shift. He'd stopped trying to control everything and started trusting that showing up was enough. Monday morning, Ethan called David Chen to discuss the implementation plan. They talked for 90 minutes about team structure, timeline, communication protocols. But they also talked about parenthood, about sacrifice, about the things that mattered beyond business. "Margaret really believes in you," David said near the end of the call. "But she also believes in what you represent, the idea that companies can operate with integrity without sacrificing success." "Can they?" Ethan asked. "I don't know, but I'm excited to find out. And Ethan, thank you for taking a risk on this. On us. Thank you for believing a story about car keys was relevant to enterprise consulting." David laughed. "Turns out it was the most relevant thing you could have told us." That afternoon, while Maya was at school, Ethan went to the airport. Not to fly anywhere, just to visit. He parked in the long-term lot, Section D, Level 3, in the exact spot where he'd left his Honda 4 days ago. Then he walked into the terminal and found the space near the parking garage exit where Emma had been sitting. The floor was empty, as he'd known it would be. No trace of the young woman who'd spent 3 days there, waiting for something she couldn't name. But Ethan sat down anyway, his back against the wall, and tried to imagine what those 3 days had been like. The fear, the exhaustion, the slow erosion of hope. And then a stranger had stopped, had seen her, had offered money she didn't want before asking what she actually needed. Ethan pulled out his phone and opened his email, scrolling back to the message Emma had sent. He read it again, slowly, letting the words settle into something permanent. Takes strength to trust someone when you have every reason not to. That was it, wasn't it? The whole lesson compressed into a single sentence. Trust wasn't about having good reasons. It was about having the strength to believe despite the reasons not to. A security guard approached, the same one from before, the kind-faced man who'd brought Emma a sandwich. "You're the guy who helped her," the guard said, sitting down beside Ethan on the floor. "The girl who was here all week." "How'd you know?" "Saw you talking to her. Saw her leave with your keys, wondered if you were crazy or kind." He smiled, decided you were both. "She brought the car back." "I figured she would." She had honest eyes, tired but honest. The guard was quiet for a moment. Not many people would have done what you did. Maybe more people should. Maybe. World might be different if they did. They sat together in comfortable silence, two strangers sharing space where another stranger had once waited for a miracle. Eventually, the guard stood up, tipped his cap, and continued his rounds. Ethan remained there for a few more minutes, thinking about trust and courage, and the way small choices rippled outward into unexpected consequences. Then he stood, brushed off his jeans, and walked back through the terminal toward the exit. As he passed a bookstore, something caught his eye: a greeting card display. He stopped, browsing through the options, until he found one that felt right. Simple design, quality paper, blank inside. He bought it along with a stamp and sat down at a nearby bench to write. Emma, I'm sitting in the airport where we met, in the exact spot where you asked me for an impossible favor. I wanted to write this here, in the place where everything changed. Thank you for teaching me that trust is a choice worth making. Thank you for keeping your promise when you could have easily disappeared. Thank you for showing me that presence matters more than control. I hope Portland is everything you need it to be. I hope you're building a life that honors the courage it took to start over. And I hope you know that what happened between us, that brief intersection of two strangers' lives, mattered more than either of us could have predicted. You changed my life. I hope I changed yours too. With gratitude, Ethan. He addressed the card to Emma Carver, care of Linda Kowalski in Naperville, with a note asking Linda to forward it to Portland. Then he dropped it in a mailbox and walked out of the airport, back to his car, back to his life. The Honda started on the first try, reliable as always. Ethan sat in the driver's seat for a moment, thinking about the last time he'd been here, 4 days ago, reading Emma's letter, trying to process what had just happened. Now he understood. What had happened was transformation. Not the dramatic kind, not a complete personality overhaul, but something quieter and more permanent. He'd learned that the walls he'd built to protect himself were also cages that kept him from living fully. And Emma, by asking for trust and honoring it, had shown him the way out. As he drove home through Chicago's afternoon traffic, Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered using the car's Bluetooth. Hello? Mr. Brooks? This is Officer Martinez again, Chicago PD. I wanted to follow up on that report from last week, the one about your vehicle. Ethan's stomach tightened. Is there a problem? Actually, the opposite. The person who called in the suspicious activity, they called back yesterday, wanted to apologize, said they'd seen the young woman driving your car and made assumptions based on her appearance. After hearing she had permission, they felt terrible about potentially causing her trouble. That's unexpected. They also wanted your contact information, if you're willing, said they'd like to donate to a homeless services organization in her name. Ethan gave the officer permission to share his email. After they hung up, he sat at a red light thinking about how one act of trust had rippled outward. Emma had been judged and reported, but that judgment had transformed into reflection, into someone recognizing their own bias and wanting to make amends. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. People learning to see each other differently. That evening, over dinner, Maya said, "Dad, what are you going to do with all that contract money?" "Probably reinvest it in the business, hire some help, build something sustainable." "Could you also donate some? Like to help people like Emma?" Ethan looked at his daughter, at her serious expression, at the values she was developing simply by watching him navigate the world. "That's a really good idea," he said. "Want to help me research which organizations to support?" "Yeah, and Dad, maybe we could volunteer sometimes too, like at a shelter or food bank." "I'd like that." They spent the evening researching homeless services in Chicago, reading about the challenges, the statistics, the human stories behind the numbers. And Ethan realized that Emma's impact wasn't just on him, it was radiating through his family, teaching Maya about empathy and action, showing her that privilege came with responsibility. Later that night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat in his home office and wrote one final email. Not to a client or a colleague, but to himself. A document he titled Principles for Moving Forward. He wrote about trust and presence, about showing up even when it was uncomfortable, about believing in people despite evidence to the contrary. He wrote about his daughter and his ex-wife and a stranger in an airport who'd asked for his car keys. He wrote about Margaret Thornton's lost husband and David Chen's faith and his own journey from fear to courage. And he wrote this: "Success is not about control. It's about integrity. It's about keeping promises to yourself and others. It's about being brave enough to be vulnerable, wise enough to admit what you don't know, and strong enough to trust that showing up is enough." He saved the document and printed a copy, folding it carefully and placing it in his wallet next to Emma's letter and Maya's photo. These were his anchors now. Not achievements or contracts or carefully controlled outcomes, but reminders of what actually mattered. Outside his window, Chicago hummed with its endless energy. And somewhere in Portland, Emma Carver was probably sleeping, dreaming of the life she was building, carrying forward the courage she'd shown in asking for help and honoring her promise. Two strangers who'd intersected for less than an hour, who'd changed each other's trajectories without ever planning to, who'd proven that trust was still possible in a world that made it hard to believe in anything. Ethan turned off his computer and sat in the darkness, thinking about airports and car keys and the mysterious way the universe sometimes gave you exactly what you needed in the form of something you'd never expected. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt whole. The first Monday in Palo Alto arrived with the kind of California sunshine that made everything feel possible. Ethan had flown out Sunday evening, leaving Maya with Rebecca for the week in an arrangement that would have felt impossible a month ago. But his ex-wife had surprised him by offering, saying she wanted to support what he was building, that co-parenting meant showing up for each other's successes. Before he'd left, Maya had hugged him tight at the door. 4 days, Dad. That's it. Then you come home. 4 days, he'd confirmed. I'll call you every night. I know you will, because you keep your promises now. The words had stayed with him through the flight, through checking into his hotel, through the sleepless hours of Sunday night when doubt crept in and whispered that he'd bitten off more than he could handle, that he'd gotten lucky with the presentation but would fail when it came to actual delivery. Now, standing in Meridian's lobby at 8:47 a.m., watching employees stream past toward their desks and meetings, Ethan felt something shift. Not confidence exactly. He still had plenty of doubts about his ability to transform a company's culture around trust, but certainty that he belonged here, that his presence mattered, that showing up was half the battle. David met him in the lobby, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You look nervous," David said, handing him one. "I am nervous. This is the biggest thing I've ever attempted." "Good. Nervous means you care. Overconfident means you're missing something." David guided him toward the elevators. "Margaret's already here. She gets in around 6 most mornings. Wants to meet with you before the team session at 9. They rode the elevator to the 5th floor, past the conference room where Ethan had given his presentation, to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. Margaret sat at her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, making notes on a printed document. "Ethan," she said, looking up. "Welcome, coffee?" "David already hooked me up." "Good. Sit." She gestured to the chairs facing her desk. "I want to talk about expectations before we bring in the team." Ethan sat, forcing himself to maintain eye contact, to project calm he didn't entirely feel. "You've proposed something radical," Margaret continued, "restructuring our entire client relationship model around trust and transparency. That's going to challenge a lot of people here who've built their careers on traditional consulting approaches." "I know. Some of them are going to resist, some are going to think you're naive, some are going to actively work against what you're trying to build." She leaned forward. "Can you handle that?" Ethan thought about Emma sitting on the airport floor, asking for an impossible favor despite knowing she'd probably be rejected, about the courage that had taken. "Yes," he said, "because I'm not asking them to trust me blindly. I'm asking them to experiment with a different approach and measure the results. If it doesn't work, we'll have data proving it. If it does work, we'll have transformed how this company operates." Margaret smiled slightly. "David said you'd grown a backbone." "Good. You're going to need it." The team meeting started at 9 sharp. 12 people gathered in Conference Room B, product managers, account executives, client success specialists, engineers, the core group responsible for Meridian's client relationships. They looked at Ethan with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to barely concealed hostility. Margaret made brief introductions, then turned the meeting over to Ethan. He stood at the front of the room, looking at these people whose jobs he was about to make significantly more complicated, and made a decision. No slides, no presentation, just honesty. A few weeks ago, he began, I gave my car keys to a complete stranger, a young woman sitting in an airport who asked to borrow my vehicle so she could retrieve something important from her old apartment. Every rational calculation said no, but I gave her the keys anyway. He watched their reactions. Confusion, disbelief. A few exchanged glances that clearly said, what does this have to do with enterprise software? She brought the car back, Ethan continued, filled the tank, left me a note thanking me for seeing her as a person instead of a problem. That single act of trust changed both our lives. It taught me something I'd forgotten after my divorce, after years of protecting myself from being hurt. That trust isn't about certainty, it's about courage. He walked to the whiteboard and wrote 3 words: trust, transparency, presence. Meridian sells enterprise solutions to companies that depend on your systems for mission-critical operations. When those systems fail, people lose money. Patients don't get treated. Supply chains collapse. The stakes are enormous. You turn back to face them. So how do you build relationships with clients who are trusting you with that much risk? Sarah Patel, the technology strategist from the board meeting, spoke up. We demonstrate reliability. Show them our uptime statistics, our security protocols, our redundancy systems. That's selling certainty, Ethan said. But certainty is a lie. Every system fails eventually. Every protocol has vulnerabilities. Every promise of 100% uptime is aspirational at best. A man in his 40s, introduced earlier as Marcus Chen, the head of client success, leaned forward aggressively. So what are you suggesting? That we tell clients our systems might fail? That's sales suicide. I'm suggesting you tell clients the truth. That you've built the most reliable systems you can, that you're constantly improving, that when failures happen, and they will, you'll be transparent about what went wrong and how you're fixing it. Ethan met Marcus's eyes. I'm suggesting you build relationships based on trust instead of selling fantasies. That's naive, Marcus said flatly. Clients don't want honesty, they want reassurance. Do they? Ethan pulled out his phone and opened an email he'd received that morning from Dr. Martinez at Chicago Hope Medical Center. This is from a potential client, a hospital that's evaluating enterprise solutions. Listen to what she wrote. He read aloud. We've had 3 vendors pitch us in the past month. They all promise perfect reliability, seamless integration, 0 downtime. But when we pressed them on specific failure scenarios, they deflected or minimized. We chose not to work with any of them because we couldn't trust that they'd be honest when things went wrong. We need a partner who will tell us the truth, not sell us a fantasy. The room was silent. Clients aren't stupid, Ethan said quietly. They know systems fail. What they don't know is whether you'll be there to help them when it happens, whether you'll be honest about what went wrong, whether you'll treat them like partners or like revenue streams. Margaret spoke from her position at the side of the room. Ethan's proposal is to pilot a new approach with 3 existing clients: complete transparency about system limitations, proactive communication about potential issues, treating client relationships as partnerships rather than transactions. She looked around the table. Who wants to volunteer their accounts for this experiment? No one raised their hand. Ethan had expected this. Change was terrifying, especially when it threatened the metrics people were evaluated on, the commissions they depended on, the careers they'd built. I'll do it, a voice said from the back. A young woman, maybe 30, with dark curly hair and an expression that suggested she'd been waiting for someone to challenge the status quo. I'm Jennifer Walsh, account manager for 3 mid-size healthcare clients. They've been with us for years, but renewal conversations get harder every cycle because they don't trust us to be straight with them. Thank you, Jennifer, Margaret said. Anyone else? Slowly, reluctantly, 2 more hands went up. A man named David Park, who managed financial services accounts, and an older woman named Catherine O'Brien, who'd been with Meridian since its founding. 3 accounts, Margaret said. 90 days. We'll measure client satisfaction, retention rates, and relationship quality. If Ethan's approach works, we expand it. If it fails, we return to current methodology. She stood up. Meeting adjourned. Ethan, Jennifer, David, Catherine, stay behind. The others filed out, most looking relieved to escape. Marcus Chen paused at the door, catching Ethan's eye. I hope you know what you're doing, he said. Not hostile exactly, but deeply skeptical. A lot of people's livelihoods depend on these client relationships. I know, Ethan said. That's why I'm taking this seriously. After Marcus left, the remaining 5 gathered around the conference table. Margaret poured fresh coffee from a carafe, and for the first time since Ethan had arrived, the atmosphere felt collaborative rather than confrontational. All right, Margaret said, tell us how this actually works. Ethan spent the next 2 hours walking them through his framework. Not abstract theory, but practical methodology. How to have honest conversations about system limitations without undermining confidence. How to proactively identify potential issues before they became crises. How to measure trust through client feedback and relationship longevity rather than just revenue and retention rates. Jennifer took notes furiously, asking sharp questions about implementation. David Park challenged specific approaches, pushing Ethan to refine his thinking. Catherine O'Brien, who'd been in enterprise sales for 30 years, provided historical context about what had and hadn't worked in the past. By noon, they had a concrete plan. Each account manager would schedule an initial conversation with their clients, explaining the new approach and asking permission to experiment with radical transparency. They'd track every interaction, document client responses, measure changes in satisfaction and trust. This could blow up in our faces, David Park said as they were wrapping up. Clients might interpret honesty as weakness. Some might, Ethan agreed. And if that's how they respond, you'll learn something valuable about whether those are relationships worth maintaining. That's easy for you to say, David shot back. You're a consultant. If this fails, you move on. We're the ones who have to live with the consequences. The challenge hung in the air. Ethan could feel everyone waiting to see how he'd respond, whether he'd retreat into consultant speak or meet David's concern with equal honesty. You're right, Ethan said. I'm asking you to take risks that could affect your careers, your commissions, your professional reputations. And if this fails, I'll carry that responsibility. But here's what I believe. The current approach is already failing. Client churn is increasing. Renewal conversations are getting harder. You're spending more energy managing expectations than building genuine relationships. He looked at each of them in turn. We can keep doing what's always been done and watch it slowly stop working, or we can try something different and maybe, possibly, build something better. Catherine O'Brien, who'd been quiet for the last hour, finally spoke. In 1997, I lost my biggest client because I lied about a system vulnerability. Told them everything was fine when I knew we had a critical security flaw. The breach happened 3 weeks later. They sued us, won, and never spoke to me again. She looked at Ethan. I've spent 27 years wishing I'd told them the truth, given them the chance to prepare, to trust that we'd handle it together. So yes, I'm willing to try this, because the alternative is continuing to prioritize short-term comfort over long-term integrity. The words settled over the group like a benediction. Jennifer nodded. David Park looked troubled but thoughtful. Margaret smiled slightly, like Catherine had just said exactly what needed to be said. They broke for lunch, and Ethan found himself sitting in the cafeteria with Jennifer, eating sandwiches and talking about her clients. The hospital I manage, St. Anthony's in Sacramento, they almost didn't renew last year, Jennifer said, had a system outage during a critical period. Took us 4 hours to restore functionality. They were furious, not because of the outage, but because we'd promised 99.9% uptime and acted like this was some freak occurrence. She pushed lettuce around her plate. If I'd been honest from the start, told them that outages happen, showed them our response protocols, treated them like adults, maybe they would have trusted us to handle it. What stopped you from being honest? Fear, company culture, the metrics I'm evaluated on. Jennifer looked up at him. But mostly fear. Fear that honesty would lose the account, damage my reputation, prove I wasn't cut out for this work. Ethan thought about standing in the airport, car keys in his palm, every instinct screaming at him to walk away from Emma's request. I get that, he said. But here's what I learned. Fear is expensive. It costs you relationships, integrity, the ability to sleep at night. Sometimes the brave thing is trusting people enough to be honest with them, even when it might cost you everything, especially then. That afternoon, Ethan sat in on Jennifer's call with St. Anthony's. She was nervous. He could see it in the way her hands trembled slightly as she dialed, the deep breath she took before the client answered. "Tom, hi, it's Jennifer from Meridian. Thanks for taking the time." She glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragement. "I wanted to talk to you about how we're approaching our relationship. Specifically, I want to be more honest with you than I have been." A pause. Tom Brennan, the IT director at St. Anthony's, sounded wary. "Okay, I'm listening." "Last year's outage, the one that took 4 hours to resolve. I told you it was a rare event, practically impossible to predict. That wasn't true. We'd identified the vulnerability 3 months earlier. I knew about it. I chose not to tell you because I was afraid you'd lose confidence in our systems." Jennifer's voice was steady now, gaining strength from honesty. "That was wrong. You deserve to know. You deserve the chance to prepare, to make informed decisions about your own risk management." Silence on the other end. Ethan watched Jennifer's face, saw the fear and courage fighting for dominance. Finally, Tom said, "I appreciate you telling me this, but I have to ask, why now? What's changed?" "We're piloting a new approach. Radical transparency. Treating client relationships as true partnerships instead of just vendor contracts. I'm calling to ask permission to try this with you, to be completely honest about our system's capabilities and limitations, to proactively share information about potential issues, to trust you enough to tell you the truth." Another pause, longer this time. "Jennifer, do you know why we almost didn't renew last year?" "The outage?" "Not exactly. It was how you handled it. The corporate speak, the deflection, the sense that you were more concerned with protecting Meridian's reputation than actually helping us solve problems." Tom's voice softened slightly. "We work in healthcare. Lives depend on our systems. We need partners who will shoot straight with us, even when the truth is uncomfortable. That's what I'm offering, starting now." "Then yes, let's try it." "But Jennifer, if this is just PR spin, if you're not genuinely committed to transparency, I'll know, and we'll be done." "I understand, and I promise this is real." After the call ended, Jennifer sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "How do you feel?" Ethan asked. "Terrified. Relieved. Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm still falling, but maybe there's water at the bottom instead of rocks." She looked at him. "Thank you for giving me permission to be honest. I didn't realize how exhausting it was to maintain the facade until I stopped." Over the next 3 days, Ethan worked with Jennifer, David, and Catherine, sitting in on client calls, helping them navigate honest conversations, watching as fear slowly transformed into something that looked like freedom. David Park's call with his financial services client went differently than Jennifer's. The CFO, a man named Richard Sterling, responded to transparency with suspicion. "So you're telling me your security protocols have vulnerabilities?" Richard's voice was sharp, accusatory. "All security protocols have vulnerabilities," David said carefully. "The question is whether we're honest about them and proactively address them, or whether we pretend they don't exist until they become problems. I don't appreciate being told that the system we've invested millions in isn't perfect. I'm not saying it isn't excellent. I'm saying it's real. Built by humans, operating in complex environments, subject to the same limitations as every other enterprise system." David glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragement. "What I'm offering is partnership, real partnership, where we work together to manage risk instead of pretending risk doesn't exist." Richard was quiet for a moment. "I need to think about this. I'll call you back." The call ended. David looked shaken. "That went poorly," he said. "Did it?" Ethan asked. "Or did you just learn that Richard values reassurance over honesty? That's useful information. Information that might cost me the account. Maybe. Or maybe Richard will respect your honesty once he processes it. Either way, you told the truth. That has value, even if it doesn't always have immediate reward." 2 days later, Richard called back. He'd discussed the conversation with his team, he said, and they decided to continue the partnership with Meridian. But they wanted quarterly risk assessments, complete transparency about security protocols, and a guarantee that David would always shoot straight with them, even when the news was bad. Especially when the news is bad, Richard had said. We can handle problems. What we can't handle is being lied to. David had agreed to all of it, and after the call, he'd looked at Ethan with something like wonder. He didn't leave, David said. I told him the system had vulnerabilities, and he didn't leave. Because you treated him like an adult, like a partner. That's what people actually want. Catherine O'Brien's experience was different still. Her client, a manufacturing company called Titan Industries, responded to transparency with immediate enthusiasm. Finally, the COO, a woman named Patricia Hayes, had said, "Finally, someone's being straight with us. Do you know how exhausting it is dealing with vendors who act like everything is perfect? We know nothing is perfect. We just want partners who will work with us when things go wrong." By Thursday afternoon, as Ethan prepared to fly back to Chicago, the pilot program had launched with all 3 clients. Early indicators were positive: increased communication, deeper trust, clients actually thanking the account managers for their honesty. Margaret called a closing meeting with the core team. "Preliminary results are promising," she said, "but this is a long game. 3 months minimum before we make any decisions about expansion. Ethan will be back week after next for another intensive session. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. I want data, not just anecdotes." After the meeting, Margaret walked Ethan to the lobby. "You did good work this week," she said. "Challenged people, made them uncomfortable. That's exactly what we needed. Some of them hate me. Some of them fear you. That's different. You're asking them to abandon approaches they've relied on for years. That's threatening. But give them time. Results will speak louder than resistance." "And if the results don't materialize?" Margaret smiled. "Then we'll learn something valuable about the limits of trust-based relationships in enterprise sales. But I don't think that's going to happen." On the flight back to Chicago, Ethan stared out the window at the landscape sliding by below. Mountains and desert giving way to plains and eventually the vast sprawl of the Midwest. He thought about the week, about Jennifer's trembling hands and David's fear and Catherine's 27-year-old regret finally finding redemption. He thought about Emma, about how one act of trust had rippled outward into all of this, into a consulting practice built on integrity, into clients who were learning to value honesty over reassurance, into a daughter who was watching her father become someone brave enough to be vulnerable. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya, sent through Rebecca's phone. 4 days, you kept your promise. "You, can't wait to see you. I made you a welcome home sign. It has glitter, a lot of glitter." Ethan smiled, texting back, "Can't wait to see it. And you, love you, sweetheart." Rebecca sent a follow-up text. "She missed you, but she was proud that you were doing important work. We both were. Safe travels." The plane touched down at O'Hare at 8:34 p.m. Ethan had told Maya he'd pick her up from Rebecca's apartment in the morning, but when he walked into baggage claim, he found both of them waiting for him. His daughter and his ex-wife standing together holding a poster board covered in glitter and magic markers that read, "Welcome home, Dad. You're a trust superhero." Maya launched herself at him, nearly knocking him over. Ethan caught her, hugging tight, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo. "I couldn't wait until tomorrow," Maya said, pulling back to look at his face. "How was it? Did you change the world?" "I'm working on it, small changes, one client at a time." Rebecca smiled at him. A real smile, without the complicated history that usually shadowed their interactions. "She insisted we come tonight. Said you'd need someone to celebrate with." She was right. Ethan looked at his ex-wife, at the woman who'd left him because he hadn't known how to be present. "Thank you for bringing her, for supporting this. You're becoming the person I always hoped you could be," Rebecca said simply. "That deserves support." They drove back to Ethan's apartment together, Rebecca dropping them off with a promise to pick up Maya Sunday evening. Inside, father and daughter ordered pizza and sat on the couch, Maya peppering him with questions about California and clients, and what it felt like to teach people about trust. "It feels scary," Ethan admitted, "like I'm making promises I'm not sure I can keep." "But you're trying. That's what matters." "When did you get so wise?" "I've been paying attention." Maya was quiet for a moment, then said, "Dad, can I tell you something?" "Always." I was really angry at you after the divorce. Not because you and Mom split up, but because it felt like you disappeared. Like you were so busy protecting yourself and working and trying to prove something that you forgot about me. The words hit Ethan like a punch to the sternum. Maya, let me finish. She looked at him with those serious eyes. But watching you change these past few weeks, seeing you actually be here, actually show up, it's like getting my dad back. The dad I remember from before everything got complicated. The one who used to play games with me and listen when I talked and wasn't always checking his phone. Ethan felt tears streaming down his face, not bothering to hide them. I'm so sorry. For all the time I lost. All the moments I missed. You can't get those back, Maya said. But you can be here for the moments coming next. That's what I want. That's what I want too. They sat together in comfortable silence, eating pizza and watching Maya's favorite show, and Ethan realized this was it. This was the success he'd been chasing. Not contracts or revenue or professional validation, but being present for his daughter, being the father she deserved, showing up even when it was uncomfortable or inconvenient or required him to set aside his own fear. Friday morning, Ethan took Maya to school, then headed to his office, a small space he rented in a converted warehouse in West Loop. He'd avoided it for weeks, working mostly from home, but now he had contracts to deliver on, proposals to write, a business to build. The space felt different somehow. Same desk, same filing cabinets, same view of the street below. But Ethan's relationship to it had changed. It wasn't a fortress anymore, a place to hide from the world. It was a workspace, a tool for building something meaningful. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Ethan Brooks? Speaking. This is Emma Carver. Ethan sat down slowly, his heart suddenly racing. Emma. Hi. I didn't expect to hear from you. I got your card. Linda forwarded it to Portland. Her voice sounded different, stronger, more settled. I wanted to call and thank you for what you wrote, for understanding what that day meant to both of us. How are you doing? Better. Really better. I've been working at the coffee shop for 3 weeks now, saved enough to get my own studio apartment. It's tiny, but it's mine. No one can kick me out. She paused. And I enrolled in community college, starting classes next month, nursing program. Emma, that's incredible. I almost didn't apply. Thought I'd missed my chance, that I was too old to start over. But then I remembered what you said in your card, that courage is choosing trust despite the reasons not to. So I trusted that maybe I deserved a second chance. You do deserve it. You earned it. We both did. Emma's voice softened. Ethan, I need to tell you something. That box I retrieved, my mom's things, there was a letter inside I'd never read. From her, written right before she died. She knew she wouldn't survive the cancer, and she wanted to leave me a message. What did it say? She said that when everything falls apart, when you lose everything you thought defined you, that's when you find out who you really are. That the people worth knowing are the ones who choose kindness when they have every reason to choose fear. Emma's voice wavered slightly. She said someday I'd meet someone who would show me what trust looks like. That I should pay attention when that happened, because those moments are rare and precious. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Your mother sounds like she was remarkable. She was. And Ethan, you were that person for me, the one who showed me what trust looks like. I'll never forget that. They talked for another 20 minutes, sharing updates about their lives, their work, the strange way a single encounter had rippled forward into transformation. Before they hung up, Emma said, I'm not going to call again. I think we both need to move forward into our new lives without looking back. But I wanted you to know you changed everything. Thank you. Thank you, too, for keeping your promise, for teaching me to be brave. We taught each other. That's how trust works. After the call ended, Ethan sat in his office, looking out at the Chicago morning, thinking about Emma's mother and her letter about kindness and trust, about Maya and Rebecca and Margaret Thornton and all the people who'd entered his life in the past few weeks and shown him different facets of what it meant to show up. The next 3 months unfolded with a rhythm Ethan had never experienced before. 2 weeks in Chicago working with local clients, building the hospital contract, being present for Maya's school events and soccer games and Friday night sleepovers. Then 4 days in Palo Alto working with Meridian's team, watching the pilot program evolve from experiment to proven methodology. Jennifer's client, St. Anthony's Hospital, signed a 3-year extension at a 20% higher contract value, specifically citing the transparent relationship as the reason for their increased investment. David Park's financial services client, after initial skepticism, became an advocate for the new approach, referring 2 other companies to Meridian based on the quality of the partnership. Catherine O'Brien's manufacturing client implemented quarterly strategic planning sessions with the Meridian team, treating them as true partners rather than just vendors. The data was undeniable. Client satisfaction scores increased by 42% across the pilot accounts. Renewal rates hit 100%. Revenue from those 3 clients grew by 37% as trust enabled upselling and expansion. By month 4, Marcus Chen, who'd been the most resistant to Ethan's approach, requested training on the new methodology. 6 more account managers volunteered their clients for the expanded pilot. The sales team started incorporating transparency into their pitch process. Margaret presented the results to the full board in late February. Ethan wasn't there for the meeting. He'd chosen to stay in Chicago for Maya's writing ceremony, where she'd read her award-winning essay to an audience of 200 people. He'd sat in the auditorium, watching his daughter stand at the podium with confidence and grace, reading words about his transformation, about their relationship, about learning to land. And he'd cried, not caring who saw, because this moment, being present while his daughter shined, mattered more than any board meeting. Margaret called him that evening. The board approved company-wide implementation. Every client account will transition to the trust-based model over the next 12 months. They're also funding a training program for all client-facing staff. She paused. They want you to lead it. Full-time position, Chief Trust Officer, relocate to Palo Alto. Salary package that would make most executives jealous. Ethan's heart sank. Margaret, I told them you'd say no, she continued, because you've built a life in Chicago that honors what matters to you. So I proposed an alternative. Consulting CTO role, remote-based, quarterly on-site sessions. Still substantial compensation, but allows you to stay present for your daughter. You did? Ethan, I've watched you navigate this balance for 4 months, showing up for Meridian while showing up for Maya. Never sacrificing one for the other, just being strategic about how you allocate your presence. That's the leadership we need. Someone who understands that integrity isn't about choosing work or life. It's about honoring both. He accepted the alternative role, and the next morning told Maya about the offer he'd turned down and the one he'd accepted. You said no to more money so you could stay here with me? Maya asked. I said yes to being your dad. The money and the work will still be there. Your childhood won't. She hugged him tight. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. In March, the hospital contract expanded. Dr. Martinez was so pleased with Ethan's work that she recommended him to 3 other medical centers. His practice grew to the point where he had to hire help, 2 junior consultants who he trained not just in technical methodology, but in the philosophy of trust-based relationships. One afternoon in April, Ethan received a package with no return address. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully carved, with a note in familiar handwriting. Ethan, I finished my first semester of nursing school with a 3.8 GPA, made the dean's list, got a scholarship that will cover next year's tuition. I'm building a life I'm proud of, and it started with you trusting me with your car keys. This box belonged to my mom. She used to keep her jewelry in it. It's one of the items I retrieved that day from my landlord's garage. I want you to have it. Not because I owe you, you taught me that trust isn't transactional, but because it represents something precious being kept safe, and I think you understand that better than anyone. Use it to hold whatever matters most to you, the things you'd retrieve from the wreckage if everything else burned down. With gratitude and hope, Emma Ethan sat holding the box, running his fingers over the carved wood, feeling the weight of the gift. That evening, he showed it to Maya. It's beautiful, she said. What are you going to keep in it? Ethan thought about that question. He pulled out his wallet and removed Emma's original letter, worn now from being carried everywhere. He added Maya's essay, printed on fancy paper from the ceremony. The principal's document he'd written for himself. A photo of him and Maya at her soccer game, both of them celebrating her winning goal. "Things that remind me who I want to be," he said. Summer arrived, and with it came changes that felt both inevitable and surprising. Rebecca started dating someone new, a kind man named Thomas who made her laugh and didn't seem threatened by her intelligence. She and Ethan developed a co-parenting rhythm that actually worked, built on honesty and mutual respect for the separate lives they were building. Maya thrived, growing taller and more confident, playing soccer at a level that earned her an invitation to join a competitive travel team. She wrote more essays, entered more competitions, began talking about wanting to be a journalist someday. And Ethan built something he'd never imagined possible: a business based on integrity, a life based on presence, relationships based on trust. The careful control he'd once thought was strength revealed itself as fear, and in releasing that fear, he'd found actual strength, the courage to be vulnerable, to show up, to keep promises even when it was hard. One evening in late June, almost a year after the missed flight that had changed everything, Ethan stood in his apartment looking at the wooden box Emma had sent. It sat on his desk now, a daily reminder of what mattered. His phone rang. David Chen. "Ethan, quick question. Margaret wants to know if you'd be willing to give a keynote at our annual client conference in September. Topic is building trust in enterprise relationships. She thinks you're the perfect person to deliver that message." Ethan looked out his window at the Chicago evening, at the city where he'd rebuilt his life, at the view he'd looked at 1,000 times but was only now learning to actually see. "What day is the conference?" "September 14th. Why?" "Maya has a soccer tournament that weekend. Let me check if any of her games conflict." He pulled up the schedule on his phone. "Her games are Friday and Saturday. If I could present on Sunday morning and fly back Saturday night, I could make it work. I'll check with Margaret. But Ethan, the fact that you asked about your daughter's schedule before answering, that's exactly why she wants you giving this keynote." A week later, Margaret confirmed the Sunday morning slot. Ethan would speak to 300 of Meridian's most important clients about trust, vulnerability, and what it meant to build relationships based on honesty rather than transaction. He started preparing the keynote, but found himself struggling with how to begin. The story of Emma and the car keys felt too personal, too raw, but every other opening he tried felt hollow, like he was performing rather than connecting. Finally, he called Margaret. "I want to tell the story," he said, "the real story, about Emma and the airport and what happened, but I'm worried it's too personal for a business conference." "Ethan, that story is why we hired you. That story is what transformed how this company thinks about client relationships. Tell it. Trust that the people in that room need to hear it." So he wrote the speech he needed to give, not the one he thought business executives wanted to hear. He wrote about fear and control and the fortress he'd built after his divorce. About a young woman sitting on an airport floor asking for an impossible favor. About choosing trust despite every rational reason to choose fear. About how that single choice had rippled outward into transformation, personal, professional, relational. He wrote about his daughter and ex-wife and the clients who'd taken risks on his new approach. About Margaret Thornton's husband and Catherine O'Brien's 27-year-old regret. About all the ways people protected themselves from vulnerability and all the costs of that protection. And he ended with this: "Trust is not about eliminating risk. It's about believing that showing up for each other matters more than protecting ourselves from disappointment. The best relationships, personal or professional, are built not on certainty but on the courage to be vulnerable, the integrity to keep promises, and the wisdom to know that presence is the only currency that actually matters." September arrived with the kind of autumn weather that made Chicago feel like the best city on earth. Maya's tournament went well. Her team didn't win, but she scored 3 goals across 2 games and played with a confidence that made Ethan's heart swell with pride. Saturday evening, he flew to San Francisco, landed at midnight, slept 4 hours in his hotel, and arrived at the conference center at 8 a.m. Sunday morning. The ballroom was massive, filled with executives and decision-makers from companies across the country. Margaret introduced him with words that felt overly generous but apparently reflected how Meridian's leadership viewed his impact. Ethan walked to the podium, looked out at 300 faces, and felt the familiar flutter of fear. But underneath it was something else. Certainty that what he had to say mattered, that these people needed to hear it, that telling the truth was always the right choice, even when it was uncomfortable. "A year and a half ago," he began, "I gave my car keys to a complete stranger." He told the whole story: the missed flight, Emma on the airport floor, the decision that made no rational sense, the fear and doubt and eventual relief when she kept her promise. He told them about Maya's soccer game and Margaret's husband and the pilot program that had transformed Meridian's approach to client relationships. And then he told them the thing he'd learned that mattered most. Every one of you makes decisions every day about whether to trust or protect yourself, whether to be honest or tell people what they want to hear, whether to show up or hide behind professional distance. And I'm here to tell you that the brave choice, the choice that leads to genuine relationships and sustainable success, is always trust, always honesty, always showing up, even when it's scary. When he finished, the room was silent. Ethan wondered if he'd miscalculated, if telling such a personal story to a room full of business executives had been a catastrophic error in judgment. Then someone started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet, applauding. And Ethan saw tears on some faces, recognition on others, the look of people who'd just heard something that resonated with their own hidden struggles with vulnerability and trust. After the speech, dozens of people approached him. A CEO who'd been running his company through fear for 20 years. An account manager who'd lost her biggest client by lying about a product limitation. A young entrepreneur who'd been so focused on appearing successful that she'd forgotten to actually build something meaningful. They shared their stories, their fears, their hopes that maybe there was a different way to do business. And Ethan listened, really listened, the way he wished someone had listened to him when he was drowning in divorce and fear and the desperate need to control everything. On the flight back to Chicago that afternoon, Ethan received a text from Emma. Just 2 words. "You're flying." He hadn't heard from her in months, had respected her request not to maintain contact. But somehow she'd known about the keynote, had probably watched the live stream that Meridian had made available to registered clients. He texted back, "Learning to land, actually. Finally figured out that being grounded is the point." Her response came quickly. "That's the bravest thing of all. Proud of you, Ethan Brooks." When the plane landed at O'Hare, Maya was waiting at baggage claim with another glitter-covered sign, "World's best dad and trust expert." "Mom helped with the wording," Maya said, grinning, "but I did all the glitter myself." "I can tell. There's enough glitter to be seen from space." They drove home through Sunday evening traffic, Maya chattering about her tournament, about school starting next week, about the book she was reading for English class. Normal conversation about normal things, the beautiful mundane reality of a life built on presence rather than achievement. That night, after Maya was asleep, Ethan sat at his desk and opened the wooden box Emma had sent. He added one more item, the program from the Meridian conference, with his keynote listed with a note Margaret had written on the inside cover. "You changed how we think about everything. Thank you for teaching us to be brave." Then he closed the box and sat looking at it, this container of precious things, this physical reminder of what mattered, not the contracts or the revenue or the professional validation, the moments of connection, the choices to trust, the courage to be vulnerable. The promises kept even when keeping them was hard. His phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. "Maya told me about your speech, about telling 300 people the story of the stranger and the car keys. That takes guts. The old Ethan never would have done that." He texted back. "The old Ethan was terrified of being seen. The new one is learning that being seen is the whole point." Outside his window, Chicago settled into its Sunday night rhythm. Somewhere in Portland, Emma Carver was studying for nursing exams, building a life from the rubble of her old one, carrying forward the courage she'd shown in asking for help and honoring her promise. Somewhere in Palo Alto, Margaret Thornton was probably still at the office, learning to honor her late husband's memory by leaving work at reasonable hours. Somewhere in this vast, complicated world, people were making choices between fear and trust, between protection and vulnerability, between the fortress and the open door. And in this apartment in Chicago, Ethan Brooks sat at his desk, looking at a box of precious things, feeling whole for the first time since his divorce, maybe for the first time in his entire life. His daughter was asleep down the hall, safe and loved and growing into a remarkable human. His business was thriving, built on integrity rather than fear. His relationships with Maya, with Rebecca, with his clients, with himself were honest and present and real. All of it traced back to a Tuesday morning in an airport, to a missed flight and a young woman asking for an impossible favor, to the moment when Ethan Brooks chose trust over certainty and discovered that courage looked like handing car keys to a stranger and believing in promises. He pulled out his journal and wrote one final entry about the journey, about everything that had changed and everything he'd learned. And he ended with these words: "Trust is not about knowing how things will end. It's about choosing to show up anyway. It's about believing that presence matters more than control, that vulnerability is strength, that keeping promises defines who we are more than any achievement or success. A stranger taught me that in an airport. My daughter reinforced it every day. My clients proved it in their willingness to take risks on honesty. And somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to rebuild the life I'd lost and started building something better. A life based on truth, presence, and the courage to be seen. That's what Emma Carver gave me when she asked to borrow my car. Not just the opportunity to help someone in need, but the reminder that I was capable of trust, worthy of connection, brave enough to be vulnerable. And that gift, that impossible, precious, transformative gift, changed everything." Ethan closed the journal and placed it in the wooden box with the other precious things. Then he turned off his desk lamp and walked down the hall to check on Maya one more time before bed. She was sleeping peacefully, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, one arm thrown over her stuffed penguin. The same daughter he'd had a year and a half ago, but also different, happier, more secure, confident in her father's presence. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching her breathe, feeling the weight and gift of this responsibility. To show up, to keep promises, to choose trust over fear, to be the father she deserved, the partner his clients needed, the person he'd always had the potential to become. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy. Inside, a father stood guard over his sleeping daughter, holding in his heart all the lessons of car keys and airports and strangers who became teachers, of walls that became doors, of fear that transformed into courage. And in that moment, Ethan Brooks finally understood what success actually meant. Not achievement or validation or the illusion of control. Just this: being present, keeping promises, showing up, trusting that love and integrity and vulnerability were enough. They always had been. They always would be.